I should have known Kevin was planning something when he insisted on driving me to Westfield Shopping Center himself. He never offered to drive me anywhere, especially not on a Saturday afternoon when the Blazers were playing. But there I was, watching his beat-up Honda disappear into the swirling snow, while I stood in the parking lot with nothing but my purse and the bitter December wind cutting through my coat. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The snow had started that morning as gentle flakes, the kind that makes Portland look like a Christmas card. By noon, it had transformed into something more serious, blanketing the city in a thick white silence that made even the busiest intersections feel muffled and strange. Kevin had been unusually attentive all week, asking about my shopping plans, whether I needed anything from the mall, if I had enough cash on me. I thought he was being considerate. I should have known better. Kevin and I had been married for 3 years, and in that time, I had learned to read the subtle shifts in his behavior like weather patterns. There was the way he drummed his fingers against his coffee mug when he was plotting something. The way he would suddenly become overly helpful right before he needed a favor. The way he would smile just a little too wide when he thought he was being clever. All those signs had been there that morning, but I had been too distracted by my own thoughts to notice. You see, Kevin thought he knew everything about me. He thought I was the unemployed wife who spent her days watching daytime television and organizing closets. He thought I was financially dependent on his modest salary from Henderson Insurance Agency. He thought I needed him for everything, from rides to the grocery store to permission to spend money on anything more expensive than discount mascara. What Kevin didn't know was that I had been building something in the shadows, something that would change everything between us. But that morning, as I sat in the passenger seat of his Honda, watching the snow begin to accumulate on the windshield wipers, I played the part he expected. I thanked him for the ride. I promised to call when I was ready to be picked up. I even let him lecture me about not spending too much money, nodding along as he reminded me that his Christmas bonus hadn't come through yet, and we needed to be careful. The Westfield Shopping Center was packed despite the weather. Families rushed between stores with arms full of packages, teenagers clustered around the food court, and the sound of Christmas carols mixed with the general chaos of holiday shopping. I had told Kevin I needed to pick up a few last-minute gifts, which wasn't entirely a lie. I did have shopping to do, but not the kind he imagined. I made my way through the crowds, past the department stores and chain restaurants, toward the upper level where the higher-end boutiques were located. That's where I was supposed to meet Lisa Chen, my business partner, and the only person who knew the truth about what I had been building over the past 18 months. Lisa was already waiting for me outside Nordstrom, her arms crossed and her expression concerned. She was one of those people who looked effortlessly put together even in casual clothes, the kind of woman who could make jeans and a sweater look like they belonged in a magazine. We had met 2 years ago at a networking event that Kevin had reluctantly allowed me to attend, and from the moment we started talking, I knew she understood something about ambition that my husband never would. "Amanda," she said, pulling me into a quick hug. "I was starting to worry you wouldn't make it. The roads are getting bad out there." I glanced toward the large windows that faced the parking lot. The snow was falling harder now, and I could see people hurrying toward their cars with their heads down against the wind. Kevin dropped me off. He's supposed to pick me up later. Lisa raised an eyebrow. She had met Kevin exactly once, at a barbecue last summer, and had formed her opinion of him within the first 10 minutes. She never said anything directly, but I could tell from the way she changed the subject whenever I mentioned him that she didn't think much of my husband's character. "Well," she said, "let's hope the weather doesn't get any worse. Are you ready for this?" I nodded, though my stomach was tight with nerves. We were meeting with Helena Morrison, the owner of Morrison Events, one of Portland's most prestigious event planning companies. Helena was looking to expand her business, and had been considering a partnership with smaller firms that specialized in luxury markets. Lisa had arranged the meeting through her connections, and if everything went well, Elegant Affairs, the company I had been secretly building, would become Morrison Events' exclusive partner for high-end weddings and corporate functions. The meeting was scheduled to take place at the Grand Hotel downtown, but Helena had called that morning to suggest we meet at the mall instead. She was already there shopping with her daughter and thought it would be more convenient. What she didn't know was that by changing the location, she was about to save my marriage and my sanity in ways I never could have imagined. We found Helena at a small cafe on the second level, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and the kind of confidence that comes from years of success. She was exactly what I had expected, poised, direct, and completely unimpressed by small talk. Within minutes, she was asking pointed questions about my business model, my client base, and my vision for growth. For the next hour, I felt more like myself than I had in months. This was the part of my life that Kevin knew nothing about, the part where I was smart and capable and building something meaningful. Elegant Affairs had started as a side project, something to keep me busy while Kevin was at work. I had used my savings from before our marriage to fund it, working with clients who paid in cash and never asked questions about invoices or business addresses. In 18 months, I had planned 12 weddings, 8 corporate events, and 6 private parties. My clients were wealthy, discreet, and completely satisfied with my work. They recommended me to their friends, who recommended me to their friends, and slowly but surely, I was building a reputation in Portland's luxury market. The money I made went into a separate account that Kevin didn't know existed, and the work I did happened during hours when he thought I was running errands or meeting friends for coffee. Helena listened to my presentation with the kind of attention that made me feel like every word mattered. She asked about my vendor relationships, my pricing structure, and my capacity for handling larger events. When I showed her photos from recent weddings I had planned, she studied them with the eye of someone who understood quality and attention to detail. "Impressive," she said finally, closing the portfolio I had prepared. "Your aesthetic is exactly what we're looking for. Sophisticated but not stuffy, elegant but approachable." Lisa smiled, and I felt a surge of pride that was immediately followed by anxiety. This was really happening. After months of careful planning and secret meetings, I was on the verge of turning my hidden business into something legitimate and profitable. "There would be some conditions," Helena continued. "We would need you to be available for events on weekends and evenings. Some of our clients require very hands-on coordination, and availability is crucial." I nodded, though I knew this would be the most challenging part. Kevin expected me to be home in the evenings and available on weekends. He had never explicitly forbidden me from working, but he had made it clear that he considered my primary job to be taking care of our home and being available when he needed me. "I understand," I said. "That won't be a problem." Helena studied me for a moment, and I had the feeling she could see more than I was saying. "Good. I'd like to start with a trial period. 3 months, 5 events. If everything goes well, we can discuss a more permanent arrangement." We shook hands, and as Helena gathered her things to leave, I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff. Everything I had been working toward was finally within reach, but taking that step would mean changing everything about my life with Kevin. After Helena left, Lisa and I sat in the cafe for another few minutes, going over the details of what had just happened. The snow outside was falling even harder now, and the parking lot was starting to look like a white ocean dotted with the dark shapes of cars. "You realize this changes everything," Lisa said quietly. I nodded. "I know. Are you going to tell Kevin?" That was the question I had been avoiding for weeks. Kevin's reaction to my success would tell me everything I needed to know about our marriage. If he was proud of me, if he supported my ambition, then maybe we could find a way to make this work. But if he felt threatened, if he tried to make me choose between my business and our relationship, Then I would have to decide what mattered more. I don't know, I said honestly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maybe, eventually. Lisa looked like she wanted to say more, but her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and frowned. My sister just said the highways are getting bad. I should probably head home before it gets worse. I checked my own phone, expecting to see a message from Kevin about the pickup time, but there was nothing. I scrolled through my contacts and called him. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. That's weird, I said to Lisa. He's not answering. Maybe he's driving, she suggested, but she looked concerned. I tried calling again with the same result. Then I sent a text message asking when he would be coming to get me. The message delivered, but there was no immediate response. Lisa offered to drive me home, but I declined. Kevin had specifically said he would pick me up, and I didn't want to create an issue by leaving with someone else. We said goodbye, and I watched her disappear into the crowd of shoppers heading for the exits. That's when I decided to actually do some shopping while I waited. I had told Kevin I was going to the mall to buy gifts, so I might as well make it true. I wandered through a few stores, picking up small items for my sister and Kevin's mother. But my mind kept drifting back to the meeting with Helena and what it would mean for my future. An hour passed, then another. I tried calling Kevin again, but the phone went straight to voicemail this time. My text messages were being delivered but not read. The mall was starting to empty out as people hurried home ahead of the storm, and I was beginning to feel genuinely worried. By 4 o'clock, the snow was coming down so hard that I could barely see the parking lot through the windows. The mall announcement system was advising shoppers to drive carefully and consider staying, put until conditions improved. I found a bench near the main entrance and called Kevin one more time. This time, he answered. Kevin, I said, relief flooding through me. Where are you? I've been trying to reach you for hours. There was a pause, and then he said, Oh. Hey, Amanda, what's up? The casual tone of his voice stopped me cold. What's up? Kevin, you were supposed to pick me up. I'm stranded at the mall and it's snowing really hard. Another pause. Right, the mall. Listen. Something came up. Something came up? I could hear voices in the background, laughter, the sound of a television. Kevin, where are you? I'm at my mom's house with Tyler. We decided to watch the game, and then the snow started getting bad, so we figured it was safer to just stay put. I stared out at the parking lot, where the snow was now so deep that some of the smaller cars were almost completely buried. Kevin, you left me here in a snowstorm. Come on, Amanda, don't be dramatic. It's just snow. You can call an Uber or something. The dismissive tone in his voice hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't an oversight or a miscommunication. This was deliberate. He had dropped me off at the mall with no intention of coming back for me, knowing that a storm was coming, knowing that I would be stranded. Kevin, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There are no Ubers running in this weather. The roads are dangerous, and the mall is practically empty. Then wait it out, he said. The storm will pass eventually. In the background, I heard his mother's voice. Is that Amanda? Tell her to stop being such a princess. A little snow never hurt anyone. That's when I understood. This wasn't just Kevin being thoughtless or irresponsible. This was a message, a demonstration of how little I mattered in his life. He was at his mother's house, warm and comfortable, watching the game with his brother, while I sat alone in a mall during a snowstorm. And his mother, who had never liked me, was probably loving every minute of it. You know what, Kevin? I said, standing up from the bench. You're absolutely right. I'll figure it out. See? I knew you'd be reasonable about it. I hung up, without saying goodbye, and stood there for a moment, letting the full weight of what had just happened settle over me. My husband had abandoned me. He had left me stranded in a snowstorm because watching a basketball game with his family was more important than my safety, and he expected me to be reasonable about it. But here's what Kevin didn't know about his reasonable, dependent wife. I had options. I had resources. And I had been preparing for a moment like this without even realizing it. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. James Rodriguez, the driver I had hired for Helena Morrison's most important clients. James worked for an exclusive transportation service that catered to Portland's wealthiest residents, and over the past few months, I had used his services several times for business meetings that required a certain level of discretion and professionalism. James answered on the second ring. "Ms. Parker? Is everything all right?" "James," I said, "I need a favor. Are you working today?" "I'm always working, ma'am. What can I do for you?" I explained the situation briefly, leaving out the part about Kevin abandoning me but mentioning that I was stranded at the mall. James listened without judgment, and when I finished, he said, "I can be there in 20 minutes. The Rolls handles. Well in snow. And I know the roads." "Thank you," I said, and for the first time all day I felt like I could breathe again. As I waited for James, I thought about what Kevin would say when he eventually came home and found me there, warm and safe as if nothing had happened. He would probably expect me to be grateful that I had managed to get home on my own. He would never think to ask how I had afforded a ride in weather like this, or where I had found a driver willing to venture out in a storm. But that was Kevin's mistake. He had never bothered to learn who I really was beneath the surface he chose to see. And now, as I watched the headlights of a silver Rolls-Royce Phantom cut through the swirling snow in the parking lot, I realized that his ignorance was about to become his downfall. The silver Rolls-Royce Phantom glided through the parking lot like a ship cutting through white waves, its headlights creating perfect cones of light in the swirling snow. Even from inside the mall, I could see the vehicle's elegant silhouette as it navigated between the abandoned cars and snowdrifts with an almost supernatural grace. James had kept his word, arriving exactly 20 minutes after our phone call, despite road conditions that had sent most sensible people home hours ago. I gathered my shopping bags and made my way toward the main entrance, my heels clicking against the polished floor with a confidence I hadn't felt when Kevin dropped me off that morning. The few remaining shoppers and store employees who were still in the mall turned to watch as the luxury vehicle came to a stop directly in front of the entrance. Through the tall glass doors, I could see James stepping out of the driver's seat, immaculate in his black suit and tie despite the weather. James Rodriguez was the kind of man who made expensive cars look even more expensive simply by being associated with them. He had worked for Portland's elite families for over 15 years, driving CEOs to board meetings, socialites to charity galas, and celebrities to private events. His discretion was legendary, his professionalism unquestionable, and his ability to handle any situation with calm efficiency had made him one of the most sought-after private drivers in the city. But more than that, James had become something of a confidant during our business relationship. When I needed to arrive at client meetings looking like the successful businesswoman I was becoming, rather than the financially dependent housewife Kevin believed me to be, James was the one who made that transformation possible. He never asked questions about why I paid for his services in cash or why I always had him drop me off a few blocks from my house. He simply provided the service with the kind of quiet dignity that made me feel like the professional I was working to become. As I pushed through the mall's heavy glass doors, the cold air hit me like a physical force. But James was already there with an umbrella, shielding me from the worst of the wind and snow. The gesture was so perfectly executed, so naturally professional, that anyone watching would have assumed I was exactly the kind of person who always traveled this way. "Ms. Parker," he said with a slight nod, "I apologize for the weather. I trust your shopping was successful?" "Very successful, thank you," I replied, allowing him to escort me to the passenger door. The interior of the Rolls-Royce was warm and quiet, the kind of sanctuary that money could buy but that most people never experienced. As James closed the door behind me and walked around to the driver's seat, I sank into the leather upholstery and felt something shift inside me. This was who I really was. Not the woman who had stood in the mall for hours, calling a husband who couldn't be bothered to answer his phone. Not the wife who had been abandoned in a snowstorm because a basketball game was more important than her safety. I was Amanda Parker, owner of Elegant Affairs, future partner of Morrison Events, and a woman who had just closed a deal that would change her life. James pulled away from the mall with the same smooth precision he had used to arrive, and as we joined the sparse traffic on the snow-covered roads, I felt my phone buzz with a text message. I glanced at the screen, expecting to see something from Kevin, but instead it was from Lisa. "Just got home safely. How did you get out of there?" "Roads are terrible." I smiled and typed back, "Private car. Long story. We'll call you tomorrow." The response came immediately. "Private car? Amanda, you're full of surprises." She had no idea. As we drove through the quiet streets of Portland, I thought about all the surprises I had been keeping, all the pieces of my real life that I had hidden away to preserve the peace in my marriage. But sitting in the back of that Rolls-Royce, watching the city pass by through windows that separated me from the storm outside, I realized that maybe peace wasn't worth the price I had been paying for it. My phone buzzed again, and this time it was Kevin. "Hey, the game's over and the snow is letting up a little. I'll probably head over to get you in an hour or so." I stared at the message for a long moment. An hour or so. As if I had been sitting in that mall all day just waiting for his convenience. As if my time, my comfort, my safety were all secondary considerations to whatever he felt like doing. I typed back, "Don't worry about it. I'm already home." The response was immediate. "What? How?" I didn't answer. Let him wonder. Let him try to figure out how his dependent, helpless wife had managed to get herself home from a shopping mall during a snowstorm. Let him puzzle over the implications of a woman who didn't need him as much as he thought she did. James caught my eye in the rearview mirror. "Everything all right, Miss Parker?" "Perfect," I said, and I meant it. We pulled into my neighborhood 20 minutes later, the suburban streets looking like something out of a winter postcard. The houses were mostly dark, their residents settling in for the evening with hot chocolate and television. But our house stood out with every light blazing. Kevin's Honda was in the driveway, covered with snow, which meant he had left his mother's house and rushed home as soon as he received my text. "Would you like me to wait?" James asked as he pulled up to the curb. I considered it for a moment. The smart thing would be to have him leave immediately, to go inside and pretend that I had somehow managed to catch a ride with a friend or neighbor. But sitting in that car, surrounded by the tangible proof of my success and independence, I realized I was tired of being smart in the way that protected other people's feelings. "Yes," I said. "Please wait. I have a feeling this won't take long." James nodded and settled back in his seat with the patient professionalism of someone who had waited outside countless houses during countless family dramas. I gathered my shopping bags and stepped out into the snow, my heels finding purchase on the icy walkway with more confidence than I felt. The front door opened before I reached it, and Kevin appeared in the doorway wearing sweatpants and a Blazers jersey, his hair still damp from a recent shower. His eyes went immediately to the Rolls-Royce idling at the curb, its elegant lines visible even through the falling snow. "Amanda?" he said, his voice uncertain. "Whose car is that?" I walked past him into the house, setting my bags down in the entryway before turning to face him. "My ride home." Kevin's eyes darted between me and the car outside, his confusion evident in every line of his face. "Your ride?" "Amanda, that's a Rolls-Royce. Who do you know who drives a Rolls-Royce?" "Apparently, I know more people than you think I do." He closed the front door but kept glancing toward the window where the car's headlights created a warm glow in the falling snow. "I don't understand. How did you even call someone? And why is he just sitting out there? He's waiting to make... Sure, I'm safe, I said, hanging up my coat with deliberate calm. It's called professional service. You might not be familiar with the concept. The barb hit its mark, and Kevin's face flushed. Look, I'm sorry about this afternoon. Things just got complicated, and with the weather and everything. Complicated, I repeated. Is that what we're calling it? Kevin ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as his way of buying time when he knew he was in the wrong but didn't want to admit it. Come on, Amanda. It wasn't that. Big a deal. You figured it out, right? You got home fine. No thanks to you. I said I was sorry. What more do you want? That was Kevin in a nutshell. He thought an apology was a magic word that could erase any mistake, any thoughtlessness, any deliberate cruelty. He had never understood that some actions revealed character in ways that couldn't be undone with a simple sorry. Through the window, I could see James still waiting patiently in the Rolls-Royce, and suddenly I realized that Kevin's surprise at my resources wasn't just confusion, it was fear. He was starting to understand that there were parts of my life he knew nothing about, parts that suggested I might not need him as much as he had always assumed. Kevin, I said, do you know what I did today? Before you abandoned me at the mall? His face went pale. I didn't abandon you. That's a little dramatic, don't you think? I closed a business deal, I continued, ignoring his deflection. A partnership that's going to change everything about my life. Kevin blinked, clearly, trying to process this information. A business deal? What business? Amanda, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the event planning company I've been building for the past 18 months. I'm talking about the clients I've been working with, the money I've been making, and the future I've been planning that doesn't depend on your permission or your approval. The silence that followed was deafening. Kevin stared at me as if I had suddenly started speaking a foreign language, his mouth opening and closing without producing any sound. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and the Rolls-Royce continued. To wait. That's impossible, he said finally. You don't have a business. You don't have clients. You're home all day, Amanda. I would know if you were working. I smiled, the same smile I had given Helena Morrison when she asked about my availability for weekend events. Would you? Because it seems like there's a lot you don't know about me. Kevin's confusion was shifting into something else now. Anger, maybe, or wounded pride. The man who had left me stranded in a snowstorm was apparently offended by the discovery that his wife had a life he knew nothing about. This is crazy, he said. Even if you have some kind of side business, which I seriously doubt, there's no way you're making enough money to afford. He gestured toward the window where the Rolls-Royce sat like a statement of everything he didn't understand about me. To afford what, Kevin? To afford professional transportation? To afford dignity? To afford not depending on a husband who thinks a basketball game is more important than his wife's safety? It wasn't about the game, he said quickly, but the lie was obvious even to him. No? Then what was it about? Kevin's jaw worked silently for a moment, and I could see him struggling to find an explanation that didn't make him look as selfish and thoughtless as he actually was. My mom said you needed to learn to be more independent. She said you rely on me too much for everything, and maybe if you had to figure things out on your own once in a while. Your mother, I said softly. Of course. Margaret Parker had never liked me, and the feeling was mutual. From the moment Kevin introduced us, she had made it clear that she thought her son could do better. I wasn't successful enough, wasn't ambitious enough, wasn't good enough for her precious boy. The irony was almost too perfect to bear. So this was a lesson, I said. You and your mother decided that I needed to learn independence, and your teaching method was to abandon me in a shopping mall during a snowstorm. When you put it like that, it sounds worse than it was. Kevin, it sounds exactly as bad as it was. Through the window, I saw James step out of the car and check his watch. He was being discreet, but I knew he was concerned about the weather and the late hour. Professional drivers didn't wait indefinitely, even for good clients. I should let him go, I said, more to myself than to Kevin. Yeah, Kevin said, relief evident in his voice. That's probably a good idea. I mean, it must be costing a fortune to have him just sitting out there. I looked at my husband, really looked at him, and saw him clearly for perhaps the first time in our 3-year marriage. He wasn't concerned about the cost because he cared about my financial well-being. He was concerned because he couldn't understand how I could afford it, and that lack of understanding threatened his perception of our relationship and his role in it. You're right, I said. I should handle this. I walked to the front door and opened it, stepping out onto the porch despite the cold. James rolled down the driver's window as I approached the car. Thank you for waiting, I said. I think we're good here. Of course, Miss Parker. Shall I put this on your regular account? The question was routine, the kind of thing James asked all his clients, but I knew Kevin was listening from the doorway. I could feel his attention like a weight between my shoulder blades. Yes, that's fine. And James? I'll probably need your services more frequently in the coming weeks. I'll call your office tomorrow to discuss scheduling. Very good, ma'am. Have a pleasant evening. The Rolls-Royce pulled away from the curb with the same elegant silence it had arrived with, its taillights disappearing into the swirling snow like something from a dream. I stood on the porch for a moment longer, letting the cold air clear, my head before I turned to face Kevin. He was staring at me with an expression I had never seen before, part confusion, part suspicion, and part something that might have been respect. Regular account? He said. That's right. Amanda, how long has this been going on? I walked past him into the house, hanging up my coat and picking up my shopping bags as if this were any other evening after any other day. Longer than you think. Not as long as it's going to. What's that supposed to mean? I turned to face him, and for the first time in our marriage, I felt like I was looking at him from a position of strength rather than dependence. It means that things are going to change, Kevin, starting now. The conversation that followed would determine everything about our future together. I could see Kevin trying to process the revelation that his wife, the woman he thought he knew completely, had been living a double life for 18 months. He was struggling with the implications of my independence, my success, and my apparent access to resources he had never suspected. But more than that, he was beginning to understand that the balance of power in our relationship had shifted. The woman he had left at the mall that morning was not the same woman who had come home in a Rolls-Royce. And the man who had thought he was teaching his wife a lesson about dependence was about to learn one about consequences. As we stood in our living room, with the snow falling outside and the warmth of the house contrasting sharply with the cold reality of what had happened between us, I realized that Kevin had given me something valuable that afternoon, even if he hadn't meant to. He had shown me exactly who he was and exactly what our marriage meant to him. And in doing so, he had freed me to show him exactly who I was and exactly what I was capable of. The game had changed, and Kevin was just beginning to understand that he had never really known the rules. But I did. I had been learning them for 18 months, building my strength and resources in secret, preparing for a moment like this without even realizing it. And now, as my husband stared at me with dawning comprehension, I was ready to play the game by my own rules for the first time in our marriage. What Kevin didn't yet understand was that abandoning me at the mall hadn't been a lesson in independence. It had been the catalyst for my liberation. And the woman standing in front of him now, the woman who had arrived home in a chauffeur-driven Rolls-Royce, was not going to go back to being the dependent wife he thought he could manipulate and control. The real conversation was just beginning. And for the first time in 3 years, I was going to be the one setting the terms. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp winter sunlight that made everything look deceptively peaceful. The snow had stopped falling sometime during the night, leaving Portland blanketed in pristine white that would have been beautiful if it hadn't reminded me of everything that had happened the day before. Kevin had slept on the couch, claiming he didn't want to wake me up after our late conversation, but I knew the real reason. He was afraid to share a bed with the stranger his wife had apparently become overnight. I found him in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee and staring out the window at our snow-covered backyard, with the hollow expression of someone who had spent the night trying to make sense of his suddenly unfamiliar world. His hair was disheveled, his clothes wrinkled from sleeping in them, and there was something almost pitiful about the way he looked up when I entered the room. "Morning," he said cautiously, as if he wasn't sure what version of me he would be dealing with today. "Good morning," I replied, moving past him to start the coffee maker. The routine was familiar, domestic, and completely at odds with the tension that filled the space between us like fog. Kevin watched me measure coffee grounds and add water with the kind of attention people usually reserved for diffusing bombs. "Amanda," he said finally, "about yesterday. About everything. I think we need to talk." I turned to face him, leaning against the counter with my arms crossed. "I think we talked plenty last night." "No, I mean really talk. About this business of yours, about the money, about where we go from here." Where we go from here. The phrase hung in the air between us, loaded with implications that neither of us was quite ready to address directly. Kevin was beginning to understand that our marriage had reached a crossroads, but he still thought he could navigate us back to familiar territory if he just said the right things. "What do you want to know?" I asked. He set down his coffee cup and ran both hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized as his way of buying time when he was nervous. "Everything, I guess. How long have you been planning events? How much money are you making? And why didn't you tell me?" The questions were reasonable, but the tone was wrong. Kevin wasn't asking out of genuine curiosity or pride in my accomplishments. He was asking because he needed to assess the threat to his perception of our relationship and figure out how to regain control of a situation that had clearly slipped beyond his understanding. "I've been building elegant affairs for 18 months, I said. "I started small, planning birthday parties and anniversary celebrations for friends of friends. Word spread, and I began getting referrals for larger events, weddings, corporate functions, charity galas, the kind of work that requires discretion and attention to detail." Kevin nodded as if he understood, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. "And the money?" "I charge appropriately for my services. Luxury event. Planning isn't cheap, Kevin. My clients expect excellence and they're willing to pay for it." "How much?" he pressed. The directness of the question caught me off guard, not because I was ashamed of my success, but because it revealed so much about Kevin's priorities. He wasn't interested in the work itself, the creativity involved, or the satisfaction I derived from building something meaningful. He wanted to know how much money I was making, because that number would determine how he felt about my independence. "Enough," I said simply. Kevin's jaw tightened. "That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting right now." The coffee maker finished brewing with a soft beep, and I poured myself a cup, taking my time with the cream and sugar, while Kevin struggled with my refusal to quantify my success in terms he could understand. I could see him trying to calculate, to estimate, to make sense of numbers that would help him categorize this new version of his wife. "Amanda," he said, "finally, I need to understand what we're dealing with here. Are we talking about a few $100s a month? A few thousand? Because if you're making serious money, that changes things." "Changes things how?" "Well, for one thing, it means you've been hiding income from me. We're married, Amanda. We're supposed to be a team. We're supposed to make financial decisions together." There it was. The real issue wasn't that I had built a successful business without his knowledge. The real issue was that I had done it without his permission, without his oversight, without acknowledging his authority over my choices and my money. A team, I repeated. Is that what we are? Of course that's what we are. Teams don't abandon each other in shopping malls during snowstorms. Kevin flinched as if I had struck him. I told you that was a mistake. I was trying to help you become more independent. By leaving me stranded? By prioritizing a basketball game over my safety? By listening to your mother's advice about how to manage your wife? Don't bring my mother into this. Your mother is already in this, Kevin. She's been in our marriage from the beginning, offering opinions about my shortcomings and suggestions for how you can fix me. Yesterday was just the latest example. Kevin stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the kitchen floor. That's not fair. My mother cares about both of us. Your mother cares about controlling both of us. There's a difference. The accusation hung between us like a challenge, and I could see Kevin weighing his response. He could defend his mother and confirm everything I had just said about divided loyalties, or he could defend our marriage and acknowledge that his family's interference had become a problem. The fact that he hesitated told me everything I needed to know about his priorities. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced at the screen to see a notification from Lisa. Helena Morrison wants to meet with us again today. Her office, 2 p.m. This is big, Amanda. I typed back quickly, I'll be there. Kevin noticed my attention shift to the phone. Work? He asked, and there was something bitter in his tone. Yes. On a Sunday? Success doesn't follow a 9-to-5 schedule, Kevin. He stared at me for a moment, and I could see him struggling with the implications of what I had just said. The woman he had married worked when he was at the office and was available when he came home. She didn't have clients who contacted her on weekends or business meetings that took precedence over domestic routines. So what happens now? He asked. You just continue running this secret business? Making money I don't know about? Lying to me about where you go and what you do? The word lying stung because it wasn't entirely unfair. I had been deceptive about my activities, though not about anything that should have mattered in a healthy marriage. But Kevin's reaction confirmed what I had suspected all along. He wasn't upset about the deception itself. He was upset about losing control. I haven't lied to you, I said carefully. I've simply lived a part of my life that you never bothered to ask about. That's the same thing. No, it's not. Lying would be telling you I was at the grocery store when I was actually at a client meeting. What I did was build a career, during the hours when you assumed I was doing nothing productive. You never asked what I did with my time, Kevin. You never showed any interest in my thoughts, my goals, or my ambitions. You just assumed I was content to exist in the narrow space you created for me. Kevin's face was flushed now, and I could see anger replacing confusion in his expression. That's not true. I care about your interests. Name one. What? Name one interest of mine that doesn't directly relate to you or our household. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Kevin opened his mouth several times as if to speak, then closed it again. Finally, he said, You like cooking? I cook for you. That's not the same as enjoying cooking. You like shopping. I shop for things we need. Again, not the same thing. Kevin sat back down heavily, the fight going out of him as he realized that he couldn't answer my simple question. In 3 years of marriage, he had never bothered to learn who I was beyond my function in his life. This isn't fair, he said quietly. You're changing the rules in the middle of the game. I'm not changing anything, Kevin. I'm just refusing to pretend anymore that we were playing the same game to begin with. My phone buzzed again, this time with a call from a number I didn't recognize. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something about the timing made me answer. Amanda Parker. Ms. Parker, this is Catherine Walsh from Pacific Northwest Magazine. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. Pacific Northwest Magazine was the region's premier lifestyle publication, the kind of magazine that featured the city's most exclusive events and successful entrepreneurs. I had seen elegant affairs mentioned in their pages when we had planned events for their advertisers, but I had never spoken directly with their editorial staff. "Not at all," I said, stepping into the living room for privacy. "How can I help you?" "We're working on a feature about Portland's rising female entrepreneurs, and your name came up several times during our research. Helena Morrison spoke very highly of your work, and we'd love to include you in the article." I felt my pulse quicken. This was the kind of recognition that could transform Elegant Affairs from a successful local business into something much larger. I'd be honored to participate. "Wonderful. We're hoping to schedule interviews this week, and our photographer would like to capture some images of you in your work environment. Could we arrange something for Tuesday or Wednesday?" "Tuesday would be perfect." "Excellent. I'll have my assistant contact you with the details. And Ms. Parker, congratulations on your success. We're looking forward to sharing your story." I hung up and stood in the living room for a moment, processing what had just happened. A magazine feature would bring visibility that I had never imagined possible. It would attract new clients, establish my reputation beyond Portland's social circles, and mark my transition from secret entrepreneur to legitimate businesswoman. But it would also make it impossible to continue hiding my success from Kevin. I walked back into the kitchen to find him exactly where I had left him, staring into his coffee cup with the expression of someone contemplating the ruins of his assumptions. "That was Pacific Northwest Magazine," I said. "They want to feature me in an article about female entrepreneurs." Kevin looked up slowly. "What kind of feature?" "The kind that comes with interviews and photo shoots? The kind that announces to the entire city that Amanda Parker owns a successful business?" The implications hit him immediately. Whatever privacy we had maintained around our marital problems would disappear the moment my face appeared in a glossy magazine alongside a description of my business success. His friends would know, his coworkers would know, his mother would know. "You're going to do it," he said. It wasn't a question. "Of course I'm going to do it. Even though it will change everything." "Kevin, everything has already changed. Yesterday, when you left me at that mall, you showed me exactly what you think of me and exactly what our marriage means to you. I can't unknow that. I can't go back to pretending that we're a team when you've made it clear that I'm just a dependent you can abandon when it's convenient." Kevin stood up again, this time with the kind of desperate energy that comes from realizing you're losing something you took for granted. "Amanda, listen to me. I made a mistake yesterday. A big mistake. I was being selfish and thoughtless, and I'm sorry. But that doesn't mean we can't fix this." "How?" "We can work together. I can help you with your business. I can be supportive, involved. We can be real partners." The offer might have been touching if it hadn't come 18 months too late. Kevin wasn't interested in being my partner when I was struggling to build something from nothing. He was interested now that I had proven my success and attracted attention from prestigious magazines. "Where were you when I was planning my first event?" I asked. "When I was staying up late researching vendors and creating proposals? When I was nervous about my first big client meeting? Where was this partnership when I actually needed support?" Kevin's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. He couldn't answer because we both knew where he had been, assuming I was watching television or organizing closets, never considering that I might be building something meaningful. "I didn't know," he said finally. "You never told me. I never told you because you never created space for me to tell you. You never asked about my dreams or my ambitions. You never treated me like someone who might have something important to say." The truth of what I was saying was written all over Kevin's face. He was beginning to understand that our marriage had failed long before yesterday's abandonment at the mall. The snowstorm had just made the failure impossible to ignore. "So what happens now?" he asked again, but this time the question carried the weight of real fear. Now we figure out whether there's anything left of our marriage worth saving. And if there isn't? I looked at my husband, really looked at him, and saw not the confident man I had married, but someone who was finally confronting the consequences of years of thoughtless selfishness. Part of me felt sorry for him, but a larger part of me felt relieved that we were finally having an honest conversation about the state of our relationship. Then we'll deal with that too, I said. Kevin nodded slowly, and I could see him trying to process a future that looked nothing like the one he had imagined when he woke up that morning. The woman he thought he controlled was successful and independent. The marriage he thought was stable was hanging by a thread, and the comfortable life he had built on the foundation of my dependence was crumbling beneath his feet. But for me, standing in our kitchen with sunlight streaming through the windows and the promise of new opportunities ahead, the future had never looked brighter. I had spent 18 months building something beautiful in secret, and now I was finally ready to let the world see what I had accomplished. The magazine feature would be just the beginning. Helena Morrison's partnership would open doors I had never imagined. And Kevin's abandonment at the mall, intended as a lesson in dependence, had instead taught me the most valuable lesson of all. I didn't need him nearly as much as he needed me to need him. As I finished my coffee and prepared to get ready for my meeting with Helena, I realized that Kevin had given me an unexpected gift. By showing me exactly who he was and exactly what he thought of me, he had freed me to become exactly who I was meant to be. And for that, despite everything, I would always be grateful. The meeting with Helena Morrison that afternoon transformed everything I thought I knew about my own potential. Her office occupied the top floor of a sleek downtown building with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Portland's snow-covered skyline. The space itself was a masterclass in understated luxury, the kind of environment where million-dollar deals were discussed over artisanal coffee and handcrafted pastries. Helena was waiting for us when Lisa and I arrived, but she wasn't alone. Seated around the polished conference table were 3 other women I recognized from Portland's business community. Sarah Chen, who owned the city's most exclusive catering company; Rebecca Martinez, whose floral designs had graced the pages of Architectural Digest; and Diana Foster, a renowned photographer whose work commanded 5-figure fees for wedding albums alone. "Amanda," Helena said, rising to greet us with the kind of smile that suggested this meeting was about much more than a simple partnership. "I'm so glad you could make it on short notice. I'd like you to meet some colleagues who are very interested in what you've been building." As introductions were made and we settled around the table, I began to understand that this wasn't just a follow-up to our conversation at the mall. This was an evaluation, a chance for Portland's elite event professionals to assess whether Amanda Parker and Elegant Affairs were worthy of joining their exclusive circle. Sarah Chen spoke first, her voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from years of success in a demanding industry. Helena shared some photos from the Williamson wedding you planned last month. The attention to detail was extraordinary, especially the way you integrated the vintage elements with the modern floral arrangements. I felt a flush of pride at the recognition. The Williamson wedding had been one of my most challenging projects, a celebration for a tech executive's daughter that required blending the family's traditional values with the bride's contemporary aesthetic. I had spent weeks sourcing antique linens and coordinating with local artisans to create custom centerpieces that honored both visions. "Thank you," I said. The bride had very specific ideas about honoring her grandmother's memory while still creating something that felt authentically her own. It was about finding the balance between reverence and innovation. Rebecca Martinez leaned forward, her eyes bright with interest. "That's exactly the kind of thinking we need more of in this industry. Too many planners either copy what they've seen before or chase trends without understanding the emotional foundation of what they're creating." Diana Foster nodded in agreement. "I've been photographing weddings for 15 years, and I can Always tell when an event has been planned by someone who understands storytelling versus someone who's just following a checklist. Your work tells stories. The conversation continued for the next hour, covering everything from vendor relationships to client management to the creative process behind luxury event design. What struck me most was how naturally I fit into this group of accomplished women, how my experiences and insights seemed to complement rather than compete with their expertise. It was Helena who finally addressed the elephant in the room. Amanda, we've been discussing the possibility of creating a collaborative partnership, something more extensive than the trial arrangement we discussed yesterday. Lisa caught my eye across the table, and I could see her excitement barely contained behind her professional demeanor. We had hoped for a simple vendor relationship with Morrison Events, but this sounded like something much larger. What kind of collaboration? I asked. Sarah answered first. We've been talking about forming an alliance of sorts, a group of independent businesses that work together on high-end events, exclusive partnerships that allow us to offer clients a comprehensive luxury experience. Think of it as a consortium, Rebecca added. Each of us brings our specialty, but we collaborate on marketing, share resources, and refer clients to each other exclusively. Diana leaned back in her chair, a knowing smile playing at the corners of her mouth. And we share the financial benefits, premium pricing, exclusive clientele, and the kind of reputation that allows us to be selective about the projects we take on. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about growing elegant affairs. This was about becoming part of Portland's luxury event ecosystem at the highest level, the kind of opportunity that could transform my secret side business into a major player in the industry. What would this mean practically? I asked, though my heart was already racing with possibilities. Helena opened a leather portfolio and extracted a set of documents. We've prepared a preliminary agreement outlining the terms, exclusive partnerships, shared marketing costs, coordinated pricing structures, and a commitment to maintaining the highest standards of service. She slid the documents across the table to me. The financial projections are conservative, but based on our current client bases and the synergies we could create, we're looking at gross revenues that would make each of our businesses significantly more profitable. I scanned the numbers on the first page and felt my breath catch. The projected income for Elegant Affairs under this arrangement was more than Kevin made in 2 years at the insurance agency. This wasn't just financial independence. This was financial security at a level I had never imagined possible. There is one consideration, Helena continued, her voice taking on a slightly more serious tone. This level of partnership requires a significant time commitment. We're talking about events that might require weekend travel, evening consultations, and availability during traditional holiday periods. Sarah nodded. Our clients expect us to be accessible when they need us. A bride planning a destination wedding in Napa doesn't care that it's Christmas Eve if she has a floral emergency. The work is demanding, Rebecca added, but the rewards are proportional. We're not competing for budget brides or corporate lunch meetings. We're creating experiences that people remember for the rest of their lives. Lisa squeezed my hand under the table, a gesture of support that reminded me I wasn't alone in this decision. But as I looked around the table at these successful, confident women, I realized that the choice wasn't really about the business opportunity. It was about finally admitting who I really was and what I really wanted from my life. I need to review these documents with my attorney, I said finally, but I'm very interested in moving forward. Helena's smile was immediate and genuine. Excellent. Take all the time you need for due diligence, but I hope you'll consider joining us. What you've built with Elegant Affairs in 18 months is impressive, Amanda. What we could build together could be extraordinary. As the meeting concluded and contact information was exchanged, I felt like I was floating somewhere outside my own body. The woman who had been abandoned at a shopping mall just 24 hours earlier was now being courted by Portland's most successful event professionals. The wife who had hidden her business from her husband was being offered a partnership that would make concealment impossible. Lisa and I walked to the parking garage in relative silence, both of us processing the magnitude of what had just happened. When we reached her car, she finally spoke. "Amanda, do you understand what just happened in there?" I laughed, the sound echoing off the concrete walls around us. "I think I'm still trying to process it. That wasn't just a business meeting. That was an initiation. Helena Morrison doesn't invite people into her inner circle lightly. Sarah Chen has a waiting list of caterers who would kill for her recommendation. Rebecca Martinez turns down more work than most people ever get offered. And Diana Foster," I added, "charges more for a wedding album than most people spend on their entire celebration." Lisa nodded emphatically. "Exactly, and they want you as a partner, not as a subcontractor or a vendor, but as an equal." The weight of that realization settled over me as we drove through downtown Portland, the snow-covered streets passing by like a movie playing outside the car windows. Equal. It was a word I hadn't associated with myself in years, not since I had married Kevin and gradually allowed my sense of personal identity to merge with my role as his wife. "There's something else," Lisa said as we stopped at a red light. "Helena mentioned that Pacific Northwest magazine contacted her for a reference before they called you. This magazine feature isn't just about highlighting successful women. It's about establishing you as one of the city's premier event planners." I turned to look at her, understanding the implication immediately. Which means this partnership announcement would be perfectly timed to coincide with the article. Exactly. Maximum visibility, maximum impact. By the time that magazine hits the stands, you won't just be Amanda Parker, successful entrepreneur. You'll be Amanda Parker, founding member of Portland's most exclusive event planning consortium. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. There would be no going back from this level of public success, no pretending that elegant affairs was just a hobby or a side project. No maintaining the fiction that I was financially dependent on Kevin's modest insurance salary. My phone rang as we pulled into my driveway, and Kevin's name appeared on the screen. I hesitated for a moment before answering, knowing that the conversation we were about to have would change everything between us. "Hi," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Amanda, where are you? I've been calling for hours." I glanced at my phone and saw 3 missed calls. "I was in a meeting. I told you I had a business appointment this afternoon." "Right, the business meeting." There was something strained in Kevin's voice, a tension that suggested he had spent the afternoon trying to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with the revelations of the past 24 hours. "How did it go?" "Very well," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Better than I expected, actually." "Good. That's good. Listen, I've been thinking about our conversation this morning, and I have some ideas about how we can move forward together." Lisa caught my eye and mouthed the words, "Good luck," before getting out of her car and walking to her own vehicle. I watched her drive away before responding to Kevin. "What kind of ideas?" "I could help you with the business side of things. Marketing, financial planning, client development. I have experience with business operations from the insurance agency." The offer was so tone-deaf, so fundamentally misguided, that I almost laughed out loud. Kevin wanted to help me develop a business that was already more successful than he could imagine, using skills from an industry that bore no resemblance to luxury event planning. "Kevin," I said carefully, "I appreciate the offer, but I have the business side handled. Come on, Amanda, you've been doing this as a hobby for 1.5 years. If you're going to make it into a real business, you need professional guidance. A hobby." After everything that had happened, after the magazine feature and the partnership offer and the recognition from industry leaders, Kevin still saw my work as a hobby that needed his masculine guidance to become legitimate. "I'll see. You when I get inside?" I said, ending the call before he could respond. I sat in my car for a few minutes, gathering my thoughts and steeling myself for the conversation that was waiting beyond our front door. Through the living room windows, I could see Kevin pacing back and forth, his phone still in his hand. He was agitated, probably frustrated by my abrupt end to our call. But that was his problem to solve. When I finally walked into the house, Kevin was waiting for me in the entryway, his expression a mixture of concern and determination that I recognized as his fixing problems face. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. "I agree. I've been thinking about this whole situation, and I think I understand what's really going on here." I set down my purse and hung up my coat, taking my time with each gesture while Kevin watched me with the intensity of someone trying to solve a complicated puzzle. "And what's going on, Kevin?" "You're having some kind of midlife crisis. You're feeling unfulfilled, maybe a little bored, and you've created this fantasy business to make yourself feel important." The words hit me like a slap, not because they hurt, but because they revealed just how little Kevin understood about me, about my work, and about the reality of our situation. "A fantasy business," I repeated. "Look, I'm not trying to diminish what you've accomplished. Planning parties is great, and I'm sure your friends appreciate the help with their events. But if we're going to move forward as a marriage, we need to be realistic about what this is and what it isn't." I stared at my husband, this man I had lived with for 3 years, and realized that he was incapable of seeing me as anything other than the limited version of myself that fit comfortably within his worldview. To Kevin, I would always be the dependent wife playing at business, rather than the successful entrepreneur I had actually become. "Kevin," I said slowly, "what would you say if I told you that my fantasy business just received an offer to partner with Helena Morrison?" His brow furrowed in confusion. "Who's Helena Morrison?" "She owns Morrison Events, one of the most prestigious event planning companies in the Pacific Northwest." "Okay," he said, clearly not understanding the significance. "What would you say if I told you that this partnership could generate more income for my business than you make at the insurance agency?" Kevin's expression shifted from confusion to skepticism. "I'd say you're exaggerating." I walked to my purse and extracted the partnership documents Helena had given me, setting them on the coffee table where Kevin could see the letterhead and legal formatting that marked them as serious business proposals rather than casual agreements. "What would you say if I told you that Pacific Northwest magazine is featuring me in an article about successful female entrepreneurs?" "Amanda, this is getting ridiculous." "And what would you say if I told you that everything I just described is true, and the only fantasy in this house is your belief that you married someone who needs your permission to be successful?" Kevin picked up the partnership documents, his eyes scanning the first page with growing bewilderment. I could see him trying to process the legal language, the financial projections, and the implications of what he was reading. "This can't be real," he said finally. "It's completely real." "But you don't know anything about business contracts. You don't have a lawyer or an accountant. You can't just sign something like this." "You're right," I said. "Which is why I have a consultation scheduled with Morrison Events' corporate attorney tomorrow morning and a meeting with their recommended accountant tomorrow afternoon." The document slipped from Kevin's hands as he stared at me with the expression of someone watching their entire understanding of reality crumble in real time. "Who are you?" he whispered. It was the first honest question he had asked me in years, and for the first time since I had walked through our front door, I smiled. "I'm exactly who I've always been, Kevin. You just never bothered to look." The silence that followed my declaration stretched between us like a chasm, filled with 3 years of unspoken truths and willful blindness. Kevin stood in our living room holding legal documents that proved everything he thought he knew about me was wrong, while I watched the careful construction of his reality collapse in slow motion. For the first time in our marriage, there was nowhere left to hide behind polite fiction or comfortable assumptions. Kevin set the partnership agreement down on the coffee table with the kind of deliberate care people use when handling explosives. His hands were trembling slightly, and I could see him struggling to process information that fundamentally contradicted his understanding of who we were as a couple. "How much money are we talking about?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I had been expecting this question since he first learned about my business, but hearing him ask it confirmed everything I had suspected about his priorities. Not, "How long have you been unhappy?" or "What can I do to support your dreams?" but, "How much money?" "Enough to change everything," I said. "That's not an answer. It's the only answer that matters right now." Kevin ran both hands through his hair, a gesture that had once seemed endearing but now struck me as childish. "Amanda, I need numbers. I need to understand what we're dealing with. Are we talking about enough money to pay off the mortgage? Enough to quit my job? Enough to retire early?" "We aren't dealing with anything, Kevin. I am dealing with my business, my opportunities, and my future." The distinction hit him like a physical blow. "Your future? What about our future? What about our marriage?" It was the question I had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. The question that would force us both to confront the fundamental incompatibility that had been growing between us since the day we said our vows. "What marriage?" I asked quietly. "The one where you make unilateral decisions about my safety and well-being. The one where you listen to your mother's advice about how to manage your wife. The one where you abandon me in a snowstorm because teaching me independence is more important than treating me with basic human decency?" I said I was sorry about that. Being sorry doesn't undo the revelation, Kevin. It doesn't change what that moment showed me about who you really are and what you really think of me. Kevin began pacing the length of our living room, his agitation growing with each step. "So this is it? You're successful now, so you're just going to throw away 3 years of marriage?" "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm finally admitting that there wasn't as much here as I pretended there was." The honesty of that statement seemed to stop Kevin mid-stride. He turned to face me with an expression that was equal parts hurt and anger. "That's not true. We've built a life together. We have a home, shared friends, shared memories. We have a house that you bought and I maintain. We have your friends who tolerate me and my friends who wonder why I settled. And we have memories of a relationship where I made myself smaller and smaller until I almost disappeared entirely. That's not how I remember it." "That's because you weren't paying attention." My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced down to see a notification from Helena Morrison. "Reviewed your initial client portfolio with the team. Unanimous. Agreement that you're exactly what we've been looking for. Let's discuss terms tomorrow." The timing was perfect, a reminder of the opportunities waiting for me beyond this conversation and this marriage. I showed Kevin the message, watching his face as he read the words that confirmed everything I had been trying to tell him. "Helena Morrison wants to discuss terms," he read aloud. "What kind of terms?" "The kind that will make Elegant Affairs one of Portland's premier event planning companies. The kind that will put me in the same league as the city's most successful entrepreneurs. The kind that will change my life completely." Kevin stared at the phone screen for a long moment, then looked up at me with something approaching panic in his eyes. "And you're just going to do it? You're going to make this huge life change without even discussing it with me?" "I'm discussing it with you now." "No, you're informing me. There's a difference." He was right, but the irony of his complaint was almost overwhelming. "Kevin, when did you discuss leaving me at the mall with me? When did you discuss spending Sunday afternoon at your mother's house instead of picking up your wife? When did you discuss any of the dozens of decisions you've made over the years that affected my life?" "That's different." "How?" Because those were small things, day-to-day decisions. This is huge. This affects our entire future. My entire future, I corrected. This affects my entire future. Your future is whatever you decide to make it. The distinction seemed to finally penetrate Kevin's consciousness, and I watched as the full implications of what I was saying became clear to him. I wasn't just talking about taking on a business partner or expanding my client base. I was talking about fundamentally restructuring my life in ways that might not include him. "You're leaving me," he said, and there was something almost childlike in the way he said it. "I'm leaving the version of myself that I became when I married you," I replied. "Whether you're part of who I become next is up to you." Kevin sat down heavily on the couch, the partnership documents spread out beside him like evidence of a crime he couldn't quite comprehend. "I don't understand how this happened. How did we get here?" It was the first question he had asked that suggested genuine confusion rather than wounded pride, and I found myself softening slightly. "We got here because I stopped being honest about who I was and what I wanted, and you stopped being curious about the woman you married. But I love you." The words hung in the air between us, and I felt a familiar ache in my chest. Not because I doubted Kevin's sincerity, but because I finally understood that his love was for someone who had never really existed. He loved the idea of me, the convenient fiction of a wife who was content to exist in the margins of his life. "I know you do," I said gently. "But you love someone who isn't real. You love the woman who needed you for everything, who had no ambitions beyond making your life comfortable, who would never challenge your authority or your assumptions. That woman was a performance, Kevin. I played her so well that I almost convinced myself she was real." "So who are you, really?" It was the second honest question he had asked, and I realized that for all the pain this conversation was causing both of us, it was also the most authentic exchange we had ever had. "I'm someone who builds things. I'm someone who sees beauty in details that other people miss. I'm someone who can coordinate 20 vendors and 200 guests and make it look effortless. I'm someone who can negotiate with billionaires and make them feel like they're getting exactly what they dreamed of." I paused, looking around our living room with its neutral colors and safe choices. "I'm someone who has been suffocating in this house and this marriage for 3 years. Kevin flinched as if I had struck him. "I never asked you to suffocate. You never asked me to breathe either." My phone rang, interrupting the moment, and I saw Catherine Walsh's name on the screen. The magazine interview that would announce my success to the entire city. "I need to take this," I said to Kevin, then answered the call. "Catherine, thank you for calling back." "Ms. Parker, I hope I'm not interrupting your evening, but I wanted to confirm some details for tomorrow's interview. Our photographer would like to capture some images of you in your natural work environment. Would your office be suitable for that?" I glanced at Kevin, who was watching me with the expression of someone witnessing a car accident in slow motion. "Actually, I think we can do better than that. I'm finalizing a partnership with Helena Morrison and Morrison Events. Could we arrange to do the photos at her offices downtown?" "Helena Morrison?" Catherine's excitement was audible. "That would be perfect. The Morrison offices would provide exactly the kind of sophisticated backdrop we're looking for. Should I coordinate directly with her assistant?" "I'll handle the coordination and confirm the details with you first thing in the morning." "Wonderful. And Ms. Parker, this partnership sounds like it will add another compelling dimension to your story. Our readers love features about women who are not just successful individually, but who are reshaping entire industries through collaboration." I ended the call and found Kevin staring at me with something approaching awe. "You're really doing this," he said. "You're really going to be in a magazine as a successful businesswoman." "Yes. And everyone will know. Everyone will see that you're not just my wife, but someone important in your own right." "Yes." Kevin was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him trying to envision a world where people knew him as Amanda Parker's husband rather than the other way around. The reversal seemed to disturb him more than anything else we had discussed. "I don't know if I can handle that," he said finally. "Handle what?" "Being married to someone more successful than me. Being known as the guy whose wife has the real career while he sells insurance. Having people wonder what someone like you is doing with someone like me." The admission was raw and honest, and it revealed the insecurity that had been driving Kevin's need to control our relationship from the beginning. He hadn't been trying to protect me or teach me independence. He had been trying to keep me small enough that his own limitations wouldn't be so obvious by comparison. "Kevin," I said, sitting down across from him, "success isn't a competition. My achievements don't diminish yours. Don't they? What happens when your business is making 10 times what I make at the insurance agency? What happens when you're traveling to exclusive resorts and meeting with millionaires while I'm processing claims for fender benders? What happens is that we figure out how to support each other's goals instead of competing with them. And if we can't figure that out?" The question hung between us like a sword, sharp and unavoidable. I looked at my husband, this man I had tried so hard to love in the way he wanted to be loved, and realized that we had finally arrived at the moment of truth. Then we admit that we want different things, and we're different people, and we stop trying to force a relationship that doesn't work. Kevin's face crumpled, and for a moment he looked like a lost child rather than a grown man. "I don't want to lose you." "You're not losing me, Kevin. You never really had me. You had a version of me that I created to make our relationship work, but that version was killing me slowly." "So, what happens now?" I looked around our living room, with its careful decorations and safe choices, and realized that I could already envision the space without me in it. Kevin would be fine. He would find someone who genuinely wanted the kind of quiet, controlled life he offered. Someone who would appreciate his stability without feeling trapped by his limitations. Now we both get to find out who we really are when we're not trying to be what the other person needs. Kevin nodded slowly, and I could see acceptance beginning to replace denial in his expression. "The business partnership, the magazine article, all of it, you're really going to do it. I'm really going to do it. And you don't need me for any of it. I don't need anyone for it, but the right person could choose to be part of it." Kevin understood the distinction, and I could see him weighing his options. He could try to change, to become the kind of partner who celebrated my success instead of feeling threatened by it. Or he could admit that he was happier with a different kind of woman, someone whose dreams were smaller and whose success wouldn't challenge his sense of himself. "I think," he said slowly, "that I need some time to figure out who I am without being the person who takes care of you." It was the most mature thing Kevin had said in our entire conversation, and I felt a surge of something that might have been pride. "I think that's exactly what you need." We spent the next hour working out the practical details of our separation, with the kind of calm efficiency that would have seemed impossible 24 hours earlier. Kevin would stay in the house temporarily while we figured out the legal and financial aspects of ending our marriage. I would move into a downtown apartment that would serve as both my residence and my business headquarters. As I packed a suitcase, with enough clothes and essentials to last the next few weeks, Kevin stood in the doorway of our bedroom watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Amanda?" he said finally. "Yes?" "I'm sorry. Not just about the mall, but about all of it. About not seeing who you really were. About trying to keep you small. About wasting 3 years of your life." I stopped folding clothes and looked at him directly. "You didn't waste my life, Kevin. You gave me something I needed at the time, even if it wasn't what I needed permanently. And I gave you the same thing. We're just different people who wanted different lives. Will you be happy?" The question was simple, but answering it required me to envision a future I had barely allowed myself to imagine. A future where I woke up every morning excited about the work I was doing, where I surrounded myself with people who challenged and inspired me, where I didn't have to hide my ambitions or apologize for my success. Yes, I said. I think I will. B. Kevin nodded, and I could see him trying to imagine his own version of happiness. Maybe he would find someone who genuinely appreciated the quiet life he offered. Maybe he would discover ambitions of his own that he had suppressed to maintain our relationship. Maybe he would learn to be proud of himself without needing someone else to be smaller by comparison. I hope you will be too, I said. An hour later, I was standing in the driveway with my suitcase, waiting for James to arrive with the Rolls-Royce that would take me to my new life. The snow had stopped falling, and the stars were visible for the first time in days, sharp and bright against the clear winter sky. When the elegant silver car pulled up to the curb, Kevin was watching from the living room window. I could see his silhouette against the warm light of our former home, and I felt a moment of sadness for everything we had tried to be together, and everything we had never been able to become. James stepped out to take my suitcase, his professionalism unchanged, despite the unusual circumstances of this pickup. Good evening, Ms. Parker. I trust everything went well with your meetings today? Very well, thank you. And James? I think we're going to be working together quite a bit more in the coming months. I look forward to it, ma'am. As we drove, away from the house Kevin and I had shared, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The dizzy excitement of standing at the beginning of an adventure. Tomorrow, I would sign partnership agreements that would transform my business. Next week, I would be featured in a magazine as one of Portland's rising entrepreneurs. Next month, I would be planning events for clients who appreciated excellence and were willing to pay for it. But more than any of that, I would wake up every morning as myself, Amanda Parker, successful businesswoman, creative visionary, and finally free to become everything I had always been meant to be. The woman who had been abandoned at a shopping mall in a snowstorm was gone forever. In her place was someone stronger, more confident, and ready to take on the world. And as the Rolls-Royce carried me toward my new life, I couldn't help but smile at the thought that Kevin's cruelest lesson had turned out to be the greatest gift he could have given me. Sometimes the people who try to teach you your place in the world end up showing you exactly how much bigger you are than they ever imagined. And sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. The snow might have stopped falling, but my new life was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. After 12 years of marriage, David said he was leaving me for his boss. What he didn't know was that I owned the company that was about to fire them both. The look on Victoria Sterling's face when she realized her anonymous investor was the wife she helped destroy? Absolutely priceless. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The champagne bubbles tickled my nose as I raised my glass. Toward the Austin skyline, the city lights twinkling like scattered diamonds below our Westlake Hills home. David wrapped his arms around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder as we stood on our bedroom balcony. To another successful quarter, he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. Sterling Digital couldn't have done it without you, cheering me on. I leaned back into his embrace, watching the distant glow of downtown Austin paint the night sky in soft amber hues. If someone had told me that evening would be one of our last peaceful moments together, I would have laughed. David and I had built what everyone considered the perfect marriage. 12 years of shared dreams, inside jokes, and the kind of partnership that made other couples envious at dinner parties. What they didn't see was the carefully constructed foundation beneath our success. While David climbed the corporate ladder, at Sterling Digital Solutions, I had been quietly building my own empire through Coastal Capital Partners, an investment firm I'd co-founded with Marcus Rodriguez back when we were both fresh MBA graduates with more ambition than sense. The firm had grown beyond our wildest expectations, managing portfolios worth hundreds of millions and holding controlling interests in dozens of companies across Texas. David knew I worked in finance, of course, but he'd never paid much attention to the specifics. When conversations turned to my work, his eyes would glaze over with the polite disinterest of someone who assumed my job was far less important than his own. He saw me as his supportive wife, who happened to have a nice little career on the side, not as the woman whose investment decisions could make or break entire businesses. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 years earlier, when Sterling Digital had been struggling to secure the funding they needed for expansion, I had been the anonymous investor who saved the company. Through a carefully structured deal using my shell company, NH Holdings, LLC, I had purchased a controlling stake in Sterling Digital. David celebrated that mysterious investor as his career savior, never realizing he was sleeping next to her every night. I preferred it that way. The anonymity gave me freedom to make business decisions without the complication of personal relationships. Marcus handled most of the day-to-day interactions with our portfolio companies, while I remained the shadowy figure behind the scenes. It protected both my marriage and my business interests, allowing me to operate in a world where being underestimated was often an advantage. That particular evening in March, David was riding high on the success of a major campaign he'd led for Sterling Digital's biggest client. The promotion to senior marketing director had come with a substantial raise, and more importantly to David, significant prestige within Austin's business community. He'd always been driven by recognition, the need to be seen as successful and important. It was one of the things that had initially attracted me to him, that hungry ambition that matched my own. Victoria wants to take the team to that new restaurant downtown next week, David said, refilling our glasses. Uchi, I think it's called. Some celebration dinner for landing the Morrison account. Victoria Sterling, the CEO who'd taken over the company when her father retired 2 years ago. I'd been watching her leadership style through quarterly reports and board meetings I attended under my corporate identity. She was sharp, ambitious, and exactly the kind of leader Sterling Digital needed. She was also strikingly beautiful, though I'd tried not to notice that particular detail during our few brief encounters at industry events where I appeared as myself rather than as the mysterious NH Holdings representative. That sounds wonderful, I replied, genuinely pleased for his success. You've worked so hard on that account. David's phone buzzed on the bedside table, and I felt him tense slightly before reaching for it. A quick glance at the screen, then he silenced it without reading the message. Work? I asked. Just Victoria confirming some details for Monday's presentation, he said quickly, but something in his tone felt off. Nothing that can't wait until morning. Looking back, that was probably the first real crack in our perfect facade. The phone calls that came at odd hours, always from Victoria. The late meetings that seemed to stretch longer each week. The way David's attention had become divided, as if part of him was always somewhere else even when he was sitting right next to me. But that night, wrapped in the warmth of his arms and the glow of his latest achievement, I pushed those concerns aside. Successful people worked hard, I told myself. Victoria was a demanding boss, and David was proving himself worthy of even greater responsibilities. The investment I'd made in Sterling Digital was paying dividends not just financially, but in my husband's career satisfaction. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of social events celebrating David's promotion. Dinner parties at the country club, networking events downtown, gallery openings where Austin's business elite gathered to see and be seen. David thrived in these environments, charming clients and colleagues with the easy confidence that had first caught my attention at a charity auction 12 years ago. I played my role perfectly, the supportive wife who asked thoughtful questions and remembered everyone's names. What most people didn't realize was that I often knew more about their businesses than they suspected. Through Coastal Capital's extensive portfolio, I had my fingers on the pulse of Austin's entire business ecosystem. The art gallery owner whose mortgage we held, the restaurant chain we'd helped expand, the tech startup we'd funded in its early days. I moved through these events like a secret agent in plain sight. "Natalie's got such a good head for business," David would tell people, his arm around my waist, always asking the smart questions. "I'm lucky to have her insights." The patronizing tone stung more than he knew. David genuinely believed he was being complimentary, but his words revealed how little he understood about my actual capabilities. In his mind, I was a clever amateur offering helpful suggestions, not a professional whose investment strategies had generated returns that dwarfed his annual salary. One evening in early April, we attended a mixer for Austin Business Journal's 40 Under 40 honorees. David had been nominated but didn't make the final list, a disappointment he'd been carrying with obvious frustration. Victoria Sterling, however, had not only made the list but was featured on the cover, photographed in a power pose against the Austin skyline. "She deserves it," David said as we studied the magazine display near the entrance. "Victoria's transformed that company. The revenue growth since she took over has been incredible." I nodded, knowing exactly how incredible. As the company's primary investor, I received detailed financial reports that showed just how successfully Victoria had executed the expansion plan I'd funded. She was brilliant, no question about it. She was also standing across the room in a stunning black dress that hugged her curves perfectly, drawing admiring glances from half the men in attendance. "Should we go congratulate her?" I suggested, partly from genuine professional respect, and partly from curiosity about the woman who'd been consuming so much of my husband's time and attention. We made our way through the crowd, past clusters of Austin's rising business stars nursing craft cocktails and discussing market trends. Victoria was holding court near the bar, surrounded by admirers, but somehow maintaining an air of approachable authority that I had to admire. "David!" she exclaimed when she spotted us, her face lighting up with genuine warmth. "And you must be Natalie. I've heard so much about you." Her handshake was firm, her smile radiant, and her attention seemed completely focused on our conversation despite the crowd clamoring for her time. I could see why David spoke of her with such admiration. She possessed that rare combination of competence and charisma that made natural leaders. "Congratulations on the recognition," I said. "Though from what I understand, it's well-deserved. Sterling Digital's growth has been impressive." "Thank you. Though honestly, I couldn't have done it without team members like David. His creative vision has been instrumental in our success." The way she looked at him when she said it made something cold settle in my stomach. There was warmth there, yes, but also something more intimate than professional appreciation. David's response was equally telling, a slight flush of pride and pleasure that went beyond career satisfaction. "We should let you get back to your admirers," I said quickly, suddenly eager to escape the magnetic pull of their obvious connection. "Of course, but we should all get dinner soon," Victoria replied. "I've been meaning to meet the woman who keeps our star director so grounded and happy." As we walked away, David was practically glowing. "See what I mean? She's incredible. The way she thinks strategically, how she can see opportunities others miss. Working for her has been the best thing that's ever happened to my career." The enthusiasm in his voice was unmistakable, and it wasn't just about business anymore. David had always been driven by success, but this was different. This was personal admiration bordering on infatuation, and the realization hit me like a physical blow. That night, as David slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and tried to process what I'd witnessed. The woman I'd been anonymously funding, whose business success I'd made possible, was stealing my husband's heart. The investment that was supposed to secure our financial future was threatening to destroy our marriage. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through Sterling Digital's recent financial reports, looking at them with new eyes. The company was thriving, yes, But Victoria's leadership style was creating a culture where long hours and intense dedication were not just expected, but celebrated. David wasn't just working late because the job demanded it. He was working late because he wanted to impress her, to prove himself worthy of her attention and approval. The next morning brought the first direct confrontation with the reality I'd been avoiding. David's phone rang during breakfast, Victoria's name flashing on the screen. Instead of the quick, professional conversations I was used to overhearing, this call stretched on for 20 minutes. David's voice was animated, punctuated by laughter that sounded more intimate than professional. "Sorry about that," he said when he finally hung up. Victoria had some ideas about the Henderson proposal that she wanted to run by me. "On a Saturday morning?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. You know how she is. When inspiration strikes, she acts on it. That's what makes her such an effective leader. I watched him finish his coffee, noting the way his eyes lit up when he talked about her ideas, the energy that seemed to radiate from him whenever her name came up. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This wasn't just professional admiration anymore. David was falling in love with his boss, and he either didn't realize it or didn't care enough to hide it. The following weeks brought a parade of warning signs that I could no longer ignore. David's grooming habits changed subtly. Better cologne, more attention to his appearance, a new gym membership that he actually used. Our dinner conversations increasingly centered around Victoria's latest initiatives, her insights, her vision for the company's future. When I tried to steer discussions toward our own plans or interests, David's attention would drift, his responses becoming perfunctory. The final piece of evidence came during a dinner party at our neighbors, the Chens. Tommy Chen had mentioned seeing David and Victoria at the Continental Club the previous Thursday, sharing what looked like an intimate conversation over drinks. "Probably talking business," Tommy had said with a knowing smile, though they seemed pretty engrossed in each other. David's explanation later was smooth and reasonable. A client had canceled a meeting, leaving them both with unexpected free time. Victoria had suggested they use the opportunity to strategize about the upcoming quarterly review. Nothing inappropriate, just two colleagues making productive use of an unexpected break in their schedules. But I knew my husband well enough to recognize the signs. The slight defensiveness in his tone, the way he avoided eye contact when explaining, the unnecessary detail that suggested a rehearsed story. David was having an affair, or at least moving steadily toward one, and he was doing it with the woman whose company I secretly owned. The irony was almost laughable. I had funded Victoria's success, enabled her rise to power, and now she was using that position to seduce my husband. The investment I'd made to secure our future was becoming the instrument of our destruction. And David, oblivious to the web of connections around him, was walking blindly toward a betrayal that would cost him far more than he could possibly imagine. As I lay awake another night, listening to David's peaceful breathing beside me, I realized that our perfect life had been an illusion all along. The success, the harmony, the shared dreams, all of it built on foundations of secrecy and misunderstanding that were finally beginning to crumble. Soon, I would have to decide whether to fight for what we'd built or prepare for the inevitable collapse. What David didn't know was that when the collapse came, I would be the one controlling how far and how hard he fell. The anonymous investor he'd never bothered to learn about was about to become the most important person in his life, and not in the way he'd ever imagined. The text message arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing quarterly reports in my home office. David had left for work an hour earlier, kissing my cheek with the distracted air of a man whose thoughts were already elsewhere. The message was from Rachel Kim, my best friend since law school, and now one of Austin's most respected divorce attorneys. "Coffee? Something we need to discuss." Rachel never used that tone unless something serious was brewing. I agreed to meet her at Josephine House, A quiet spot in East Austin where we could talk without running into anyone from David's professional circle. The drive gave me time to prepare myself for whatever bomb Rachel was about to drop, though. Nothing could have readied me for the devastating precision of her revelation. She was already seated when I arrived, her usually immaculate appearance somehow subdued. Rachel had built her reputation on being unflappable in the face of messy divorces and bitter custody battles. But today she looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I've been debating whether to tell you this for weeks," she began without preamble. "But as your friend, I can't stay quiet anymore." She slid her phone across the table, showing me a series of photographs that made my blood run cold. David and Victoria at various locations around Austin, their body language telling a story I'd been desperately trying not to read. Outside the Driscoll Hotel, sharing an intimate dinner at a restaurant I didn't recognize. Walking hand in hand through Zilker Park. The final image showed them kissing in the parking lot of Sterling Digital's office building. "These were taken by a private investigator," Rachel said quietly. "Another client hired him to follow her. Cheating husband. And he happened to capture your David in the background. When he realized who it was, he brought the photos to me." I stared at the images, feeling strangely detached from my own devastation. Part of me had known this was coming, had seen the signs accumulating like storm clouds on the horizon. But knowing and seeing were entirely different experiences. The visual proof transformed suspicion into crushing reality. "How long?" I managed to ask. "Based on the timestamps, at least 6 weeks. Probably longer." Rachel's voice was gentle but professional. "Natalie, I'm so sorry. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear." I scrolled through the photos again, noting the easy intimacy between David and Victoria. They looked like a couple who'd been together for months, not weeks. The way she leaned into him, the protective way his arm curved around her shoulders, the obvious joy on both their faces. It was everything our marriage had been lacking for longer than I'd wanted to admit. "What are you going to do?" Rachel asked. The question hung in the air while I processed not just the betrayal, but the complex web of implications surrounding it. David was having an affair with the CEO of the company I owned. Victoria was using her position of power to seduce my husband while benefiting from my anonymous investment. The situation was so tangled that I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. "I need to think," I said finally. "This is more complicated than it appears." Rachel raised an eyebrow but didn't press. She knew me well enough to recognize when I was operating in strategic mode rather than emotional crisis. We'd been friends long enough for her to understand that my first instinct was always to gather information and consider all angles before making any moves. The drive home was a blur of Austin traffic and racing thoughts. I kept seeing those photographs, the happiness on David's face that he hadn't shown me in months. When had I stopped being the person who brought him joy? When had our marriage become something he wanted to escape rather than cherish? By the time I reached Maple Ridge Drive, I'd made my first decision. I would not confront David immediately. Instead, I would observe, document, and prepare. If this marriage was ending, I would control how and when it happened. More importantly, I would ensure that I understood every aspect of the situation before revealing my hand. That evening, David came home later than usual, claiming he'd been stuck in a strategy session that ran long. His explanation was smooth and believable, delivered with the practiced ease of someone who'd been lying consistently for weeks. He seemed relaxed, almost cheerful. The tension I'd noticed in recent months replaced by an energy that I now understood came from his secret, romance. "How was your day?" he asked, loosening his tie as he headed toward the kitchen. "Productive," I replied, watching him carefully. "Rachel and I had coffee. She mentioned seeing you downtown yesterday." The slightest pause in his movements. So brief I might have missed it if I hadn't been looking for it. "Oh? Where?" "Near the Driscoll. She said you were with someone from work." Probably Victoria, he said casually. We had a client lunch that ran late, so we walked around downtown afterward to discuss the presentation. Fresh air helps her think. The lie rolled off his tongue effortlessly. I marveled at how naturally deception came to him when it served his purposes. This was a side of David I'd never seen before, and it made me question how well I'd ever really known him. She seems very dedicated, I observed. She is. That's what makes her such an effective leader. She's willing to put in the extra time and effort to get things right. The irony of his words wasn't lost on me. Victoria was, indeed, putting in extra effort, just not the kind that would benefit Sterling Digital's shareholders. She was systematically destroying the personal life of her company's primary investor while conducting her affair under the guise of professional dedication. Over the following days, I began my own investigation. Using my access to Sterling Digital's financial records and employee communications, I started building a timeline of David and Victoria's relationship. What I discovered was both more extensive and more calculating than I'd imagined. The affair had begun almost immediately after Victoria took over as CEO. Their first documented interaction outside of normal business occurred just 3 weeks after her promotion, a dinner that was supposedly to discuss David's role in the company's expansion plans. From there, the meetings had become more frequent and more personal, always carefully disguised as business necessities. What disturbed me most was the pattern of manipulation I uncovered. Victoria had systematically isolated David from his colleagues, creating special projects that required him to work directly with her. She'd restructured his responsibilities to increase his dependence on her approval and guidance. She'd even arranged for him to travel with her to conferences where their hotel accommodations were suspiciously coordinated. This wasn't a spontaneous romance that had developed naturally between two colleagues. This was a calculated seduction, executed with the precision of a corporate takeover. Victoria had identified David as a target and pursued him with the same strategic thinking she applied to business ventures. The realization filled me with cold fury. As Sterling Digital's anonymous owner, I'd trusted Victoria to run the company with integrity and professionalism. Instead, she was using her position to conduct personal affairs that created liability and compromised the business environment. Worse, she was doing it with complete disregard for the fact that her actions were destroying an investor's marriage. But my anger was equally directed at David. He wasn't an innocent victim in this scenario. He was a married man who'd chosen to betray his vows for the thrill of an affair with his younger, more successful boss. The David I'd thought I knew would have been horrified by such behavior. This David was apparently capable of compartmentalizing his ethics when it suited his desires. As I dug deeper into the company's communications, I discovered another disturbing element. Victoria had been subtly undermining other employees who might pose competition for David's attention or advancement. 2 promising marketing directors had been transferred to less desirable positions after showing too much familiarity with David during team meetings. A talented female executive had been passed over for promotion after Victoria expressed concerns about her team fit. Victoria was reshaping the entire company culture to support her relationship with David, creating an environment where her personal desires took precedence over business objectives. It was exactly the kind of leadership failure that could destroy a company's value and expose investors to significant liability. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Marcus Rodriguez called me one afternoon with concerns about Sterling Digital's recent performance metrics. As my partner in Coastal Capital, he monitored our portfolio companies for any signs of trouble that might require intervention. "Something's off about Sterling Digital," he said without preamble. "The numbers look good on the surface, but there are some troubling patterns in the employee satisfaction surveys and productivity metrics." "What kind of patterns?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "Declining morale, increased turnover in key departments, complaints about favoritism, and unclear promotion criteria. The kind of issues that suggest leadership problems at the top level." Marcus was identifying from an objective business perspective the same problems I'd uncovered through my personal investigation. Victoria's affair with David wasn't just destroying my marriage, it was compromising the company's effectiveness and threatening the value of my investment. "Should we schedule a board meeting?" Marcus continued. "If there are serious management issues, we need to address them before they impact our returns." "Not yet," I said carefully. "Let me do some additional research first. I want to understand the full scope of the problem before we take any action." That evening, I sat in my home office staring at the evidence I'd accumulated. Bank records showing David's increased spending on restaurants and hotels. Company communications revealing the preferential treatment he'd been receiving. Photographs documenting their public displays of affection. A pattern of business decisions that prioritized personal relationships over professional obligations. The betrayal was complete and undeniable. David had not only cheated on me, he'd done it in a way that threatened everything I'd worked to build. The company I'd saved was being mismanaged by a CEO who prioritized her love life over her fiduciary responsibilities. The husband I'd supported was using his position to conduct an affair that could expose both our personal finances and my business interests to significant risk. But perhaps most insulting of all was the casual arrogance with which they'd conducted their relationship. Neither David nor Victoria had shown any concern for discretion or consequences. They'd pursued their affair with the confidence of people who believed they were untouchable, that their actions existed in a vacuum without impact on others. They had no idea that the wife they'd dismissed as irrelevant was actually the person with the power to end both their careers and their relationship. They'd underestimated me completely, assuming that I was nothing more than a supportive spouse, with no real influence or resources of my own. As I closed the files and powered down my computer, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt and betrayal were still there, but they were being overshadowed by something colder and more focused. David and Victoria had made their choices based on the assumption that I was powerless to stop them. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Rachel, asking her to begin preparing divorce papers, but to keep them confidential until I was ready to proceed. The second was to Marcus, requesting that he compile a comprehensive review of Victoria's performance as CEO, with particular attention to any decisions that might compromise the company's value or create legal liability. David left for work that morning with a kiss on my cheek and a promise to be home for dinner. He had no idea that his wife was already 3 steps ahead of him, preparing to dismantle the carefully constructed deception that had consumed our marriage. The anonymous investor he'd never bothered to learn about was about to become the most important person in his life. The betrayal was complete, but the consequences were just beginning. The revelation came during a routine Wednesday morning call with Patricia Walsh, Coastal Capital's corporate attorney. I'd asked her to review Sterling Digital's recent corporate governance decisions, ostensibly as part of our standard portfolio oversight. What she discovered changed everything I thought I knew about my position in this unfolding disaster. "Natalie, we need to talk immediately." Patricia's voice carried an urgency I'd rarely heard from the unflappable lawyer. "Can you come to my office this morning? There's something about the Sterling Digital situation that you need to see in person." An hour later, I sat across from Patricia's mahogany desk while she spread out a series of legal documents that made my pulse quicken. The woman who'd guided me through countless complex business deals over the past decade wore an expression of barely contained excitement mixed with professional concern. "I've been reviewing Sterling Digital's corporate structure as you requested," she began, adjusting her reading glasses. "And I discovered something rather extraordinary about your position as majority shareholder through NH Holdings." She pointed to a specific clause buried deep in the company's charter documents, language so technical that I'd missed its significance during my original investment review. "This provision gives the majority shareholder the right to call for..." Immediate review of executive performance based on conduct that could compromise company assets or create legal liability. My heart began racing as Patricia continued her explanation. More importantly, there's a morality clause here that specifically addresses relationships between executives and employees. If the CEO engages in conduct that creates a hostile work environment or exposes the company to harassment liability, the majority shareholder can initiate immediate removal proceedings. The implications hit me like lightning. Victoria's affair with David wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a clear violation of corporate governance standards that gave me the legal right to remove her from her position. As the anonymous owner of Sterling Digital, I had the power to end both their careers and their relationship with a single board resolution. There's more, Patricia continued, pulling out another document. The executive compensation agreements include clawback provisions for misconduct. If Victoria is removed for cause, she forfeits not only her severance package, but also her stock options and performance bonuses dating back 2 years. We're talking about approximately $4 million. I stared at the documents, processing the magnitude of what Patricia had uncovered. The legal framework already existed to destroy Victoria's career and financial security. All I needed was documentation of the misconduct, which I already possessed in abundance. "What about David?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. As a direct report engaging in an inappropriate relationship with his supervisor, he'd be terminated for cause as well. No severance, no benefits continuation, and his non-compete clause would remain in effect, essentially blacklisting him from the Austin marketing industry for 18 months. The power I'd been unknowingly holding was breathtaking. With the right legal strategy, I could eliminate both David and Victoria from their professional positions while reclaiming control of the company they'd been mismanaging. The anonymous investor they'd ignored and dismissed was actually the person who controlled their professional destinies. "Patricia, I need you to prepare 2 sets of documents," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "First, a formal board resolution, calling for CEO review based on the evidence we've discussed. Second, documentation of the hostile work environment claim, including the pattern of favoritism and retaliation against other employees. And the timeline for implementation?" I considered the question carefully. The nuclear option Patricia had outlined would devastate both David and Victoria immediately, but timing would be crucial for maximum impact. I wanted them to understand not just that they were being punished, but exactly who was administering that punishment and why. I want everything ready to execute, but held in reserve until I determine the optimal moment, I decided. This isn't just about legal compliance. It's about justice. Patricia nodded with the grim satisfaction of a lawyer who appreciated elegant strategy. "I'll have preliminary documents ready by Friday. And Natalie, what you're planning is completely legal and arguably necessary for protecting your investment. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty about exercising your legitimate rights as majority shareholder." Leaving Patricia's office, I felt a transformation occurring within me that was both exhilarating and terrifying. For weeks, I'd been the victim in this scenario, the betrayed wife discovering her husband's infidelity. Now I understood that I'd actually been the person with the most power all along. I just hadn't realized it. The drive back to Westlake Hills gave me time to consider my next moves. Simply destroying David and Victoria's careers would be satisfying, but it wouldn't address the deeper issue of how they'd manipulated and deceived me. I wanted them to understand the full scope of their miscalculation before I revealed my hand. That afternoon, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called Sterling Digital's main number and asked to schedule a meeting with Victoria Sterling to discuss potential investment opportunities. Using my real name rather than the NH Holdings corporate identity, I positioned myself as a successful Austin investor interested in exploring partnership possibilities. Victoria's assistant was immediately accommodating. Ms. Sterling would be delighted to meet with me Thursday afternoon. Could I provide some background on my investment focus? I gave a carefully edited version of my credentials, emphasizing my portfolio's performance without revealing the full extent of my resources or the fact that I already owned her company. The plan crystallizing in my mind was both simple and devastating. I would meet with Victoria face to face, allowing her to pitch me on investing in the company I already owned while she conducted an affair with my husband. The irony would be exquisite, and it would give me the opportunity to observe her up close while she remained completely unaware of who I really was. Wednesday evening brought another piece of the puzzle into place when David announced he'd be attending a Sterling Digital team dinner Thursday night. Victoria's treating the senior staff to celebrate the Morrison account's success, he explained with barely contained enthusiasm. Should be a nice evening. I smiled and told him to have fun, knowing that I'd be spending Thursday afternoon in his lover's office while she tried to convince me to invest in her company. The symmetry was almost poetic. Thursday arrived with unseasonably warm weather. That felt appropriate for the confrontation I was orchestrating. I dressed carefully for my meeting with Victoria, choosing a navy blue suit that projected authority without appearing threatening. I wanted to be memorable, but not in a way that would make her suspicious. Sterling Digital's downtown offices occupied 3 floors of a gleaming glass tower that showcased Victoria's taste for modern aesthetics. The reception area featured abstract art and minimalist furniture that spoke to success and sophistication. It was exactly the kind of environment that would impress potential investors and clients. Victoria's assistant led me to a conference room on the top floor with panoramic views of Austin's skyline. Victoria entered moments later, and I had to admit that seeing her in her professional environment was impressive. She moved with confidence and authority, every inch the successful CEO who'd transformed her father's company into a regional powerhouse. "Ms. Harper, thank you so much for coming in," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "I understand you're interested in learning more about Sterling Digital's growth trajectory." Up close, Victoria was even more striking than I'd remembered. From our brief encounter at the networking event, she possessed that rare combination of beauty and intelligence that made her naturally magnetic. I could understand why David had been drawn to her, even as I resented the pain that attraction had caused. "I'm always interested in well-managed companies with strong leadership," I replied, settling into the chair across from her. "Your reputation in Austin's business community is quite impressive." For the next hour, Victoria walked me through Sterling Digital's business model, financial performance, and expansion plans with the polished expertise of someone who'd given this presentation countless times. She was undeniably brilliant, speaking knowledgeably about market trends, competitive advantages, and strategic opportunities. What fascinated me was how different she seemed in this setting compared to the woman in those photographs with David. Here, she was entirely professional, focused, and articulate. The persona she projected was of someone completely dedicated to business success, with no hint of the personal complications that were compromising her judgment. "Our recent account acquisitions have positioned us for significant growth over the next 18 months, she continued, pulling up financial projections on her laptop. "We're particularly excited about our expanded capabilities in digital marketing integration." I asked thoughtful questions about staffing, client retention, and competitive positioning, genuinely curious about how she viewed the company's prospects. Her answers revealed both impressive business acumen and troubling blind spots. She spoke glowingly about David's contributions without any acknowledgement of the ethical issues their relationship created. "One of our key advantages is the depth of talent in our marketing team," she said at one point. "Our senior marketing director, David Harper, has been instrumental in developing our client acquisition strategy. His creative vision and strategic thinking have exceeded all expectations." The casual way she mentioned David's name, without any indication that she was discussing my husband or that their relationship extended beyond professional collaboration, was breathtaking in its audacity. She was sitting across from David's wife, praising his professional capabilities while conducting a secret affair with him. Mr. Harper sounds like a valuable asset, I observed, watching her face carefully. It's always impressive when a company can attract and retain top talent. Absolutely. David brings exactly the kind of innovative thinking that drives sustainable growth. He's become an integral part of our leadership team. The euphemism was particularly galling. David had indeed become integral to Victoria's plans, just not in the way that would benefit Sterling Digital's shareholders. I wondered if she genuinely believed her own corporate speak, or if she was simply that comfortable with compartmentalizing her professional and personal motivations. As the meeting continued, I found myself developing a grudging respect for Victoria's business capabilities, even as I planned her professional destruction. She was clearly talented and had genuinely improved Sterling Digital's performance during her tenure. Under different circumstances, she might have been exactly the kind of CEO that would maximize my investment returns. But circumstances weren't different. She'd chosen to pursue my husband while managing my company, creating conflicts of interest that compromised her effectiveness and threatened the business I'd worked to build. Talent without integrity was ultimately worthless in a leadership position. I'm impressed by what you've accomplished, I said as our meeting drew to a close. Sterling Digital clearly has strong fundamentals and capable leadership. I'd like to have my team review your materials in more detail before making any investment decisions. Of course, Victoria replied, standing to shake my hand again. I appreciate your interest, and I hope we'll have the opportunity to work together. Companies like Sterling Digital benefit enormously from partnership with sophisticated investors who understand our industry. The irony of her words was almost overwhelming. She was expressing hope for partnership with an investor who already owned her company and was preparing to use that ownership to end her career. She was praising sophisticated investors while conducting herself in a manner that demonstrated complete disrespect for investor interests. I'll be in touch soon, I promised, gathering my materials. You can expect to hear from my representatives within the next few days. Walking back to my car, I felt the final pieces of my strategy clicking into place. Victoria had given me everything I needed to justify the actions I was planning. Her casual discussion of David's contributions, her obvious pride in their collaboration, her complete lack of awareness about the ethical implications of their relationship all provided perfect documentation of her unfitness for leadership. That evening, I sat in my home office reviewing the notes from my meeting while David prepared for his dinner with Victoria's team. The contrast between the professional woman I'd met that afternoon and the scheming seductress revealed in those photographs was remarkable. Victoria was clearly capable of maintaining multiple personas depending on her audience and objectives. But that flexibility was also her weakness. She'd become so comfortable compartmentalizing her various roles that she'd lost sight of how they interconnected. The CEO who'd impressed me with her business acumen was the same woman who was compromising her company's governance standards. The leader who spoke passionately about integrity and performance was conducting an affair that violated both principles. As David kissed me goodbye and headed out for his evening with Victoria, I opened my laptop and began drafting the email. That would set everything in motion. Patricia would receive my instructions first thing Friday morning, triggering the legal process that would transform me from anonymous investor to active owner. The game was about to change completely, and neither David nor Victoria had any idea what was coming. They'd built their relationship on the assumption that I was powerless to stop them. Tomorrow, they would begin learning just how catastrophically they'd miscalculated. The anonymous investor they'd dismissed was about to become the most important person in both their lives, and the revelation would destroy everything they thought they'd built together. Friday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that follows decisive action. I had spent the night finalizing my strategy, and by 8 o'clock I was sitting in Patricia Walsh's office watching her review the documents that would reshape multiple lives before the day ended. The legal papers were spread across her conference table like battle plans, each one precisely crafted to maximize impact and minimize escape routes. The board resolution is bulletproof, Patricia confirmed, adjusting her glasses as she examined the final draft. Victoria Sterling's conduct clearly violates multiple provisions in the corporate charter. The documented evidence of favoritism, the hostile work environment complaints, and the inappropriate relationship with a subordinate all constitute grounds for immediate removal. She slid another document across the table. The financial clawback. Provisions are equally solid. Based on the timeline we've established, she'll forfeit approximately $4.2 million in compensation and benefits. The non-compete clause remains in effect for 2 years, essentially barring her from executive positions at any competing firm in Texas. I studied the numbers, struck by how completely financial devastation could reshape someone's life. Victoria had built her lifestyle around CEO-level compensation, from her downtown loft to her luxury car payments. The immediate loss of income combined with the industry blacklisting would force her to rebuild everything from scratch. "What about David's termination?" I asked. "Equally comprehensive," Patricia replied, with the satisfaction of a lawyer who'd crafted an airtight case. As the subordinate party in an inappropriate relationship with his supervisor, he's subject to immediate dismissal for cause, no severance package, no benefits continuation, and his non-compete agreement remains fully enforceable. Given Sterling, Digital's market position, he'll be effectively locked out of Austin's marketing industry for 18 months minimum. The thoroughness of their professional destruction was breathtaking. Within hours, I could reduce both David and Victoria from successful executives to unemployed pariahs struggling to find work in their chosen fields. The power was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. I want to schedule an emergency board meeting for Monday morning, I decided. But I want Victoria to receive advance notice this afternoon that her performance is under review. She should have the weekend to contemplate what's coming without being able to do anything about it. Patricia nodded approvingly. Psychological pressure is often more effective than immediate action. She'll spend the weekend wondering exactly what we know and how much evidence we've gathered. The timing was deliberately calculated. Today was Friday, and David had mentioned that he and Victoria were planning to attend a company retreat at Hill Country Resort over the weekend. Nothing overtly romantic, just a leadership team strategy session that happened to include only the two of them. Their last weekend together before I destroyed their carefully constructed fantasy. At 10:30, I made the phone call that would begin the final phase of my plan. Using my authority as majority shareholder, I contacted Sterling, Digital's board secretary, and formally requested an emergency session to address urgent governance issues. The secretary, clearly flustered by the unexpected intervention from the mysterious NH Holdings representative, stammered through questions about scheduling and agenda items. "Monday morning at 9 o'clock, I stated firmly. The agenda will focus on executive performance review and potential leadership changes. Ms. Sterling should be advised that her employment status will be under discussion." The secretary's sharp intake of breath was audible through the phone. In 3 years as CEO, Victoria had never faced serious scrutiny from the board. She'd assumed her position was secure, protected by strong financial performance and the absence of any obvious problems. The notification that her job was suddenly in jeopardy would shatter that comfortable assumption. By noon, word of the emergency board meeting had reached Victoria. I knew this because David called me from Sterling Digital's office, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Natalie, something strange is happening at work," he said without preamble. "Victoria just got notification that the board wants to review her performance on Monday. Nobody knows what triggered it or what they're planning to discuss." I injected appropriate concern into my voice. "That does sound unusual. Do you think there's some kind of problem with the company?" "I don't know. Victoria's been an excellent CEO. The financial results speak for themselves. His loyalty to her was touching, if misguided. She's trying to figure out who called for the review and what their concerns might be." "I'm sure it's just routine corporate governance," I said soothingly. These things probably happen all the time in successful companies. What David didn't realize was that I could see Victoria's increasingly frantic attempts to gather information playing out in real time. As the majority shareholder, I had access to all corporate communications, including the urgent emails she was sending to board members and legal advisors. Her messages revealed growing desperation as she tried to understand what had triggered the sudden scrutiny. The afternoon brought another delicious moment of irony when Victoria called me directly. Her assistant explained that Ms. Sterling wanted to schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss the investment opportunity we'd explored the day before. The CEO, who was facing professional catastrophe, was still trying to court the very person orchestrating her downfall. "I'm afraid my schedule is quite full next week," I told the assistant. "Perhaps we could reconnect after Ms. Sterling has resolved her current business priorities." The polite deflection was calculated to increase Victoria's anxiety without revealing my hand. She would spend the weekend wondering whether the mysterious board review was somehow connected to her failed attempt to secure new investment. The uncertainty would compound her stress and make the eventual revelation even more devastating. That evening, I sat in my home office monitoring Sterling Digital's internal communications while David packed for his weekend retreat with Victoria. His suitcase lay open on our bed, filled with casual clothes that suggested long walks and intimate conversations rather than business strategy sessions. He was humming softly as he folded shirts, obviously looking forward to uninterrupted time with his lover. "The resort has a spa," he mentioned casually. Victoria thought it would be good for the team to decompress after all the recent stress. The team consisted of exactly 2 people, neither of whom would be decompressing once Monday morning arrived. I watched David select his favorite cologne, the one I'd given him for our anniversary 2 years ago, and felt a pang of sadness for what we'd lost. Despite everything, part of me still remembered the man I'd fallen in love with, the ambitious but principled person who'd seemed incapable of this level of betrayal. "That sounds lovely," I said, managing to keep my voice neutral. "You both deserve some time to relax and plan for the future." David kissed me goodbye Saturday morning with the distracted affection of a man whose thoughts were already elsewhere. I watched his car disappear down Maple Ridge Drive, knowing it would be the last time he left our house as my husband in anything but name. By Monday evening, our marriage would be over in all but the legal formalities. The weekend passed with agonizing slowness as I waited for Monday's confrontation. I spent Saturday reviewing the evidence Patricia had compiled, ensuring that every detail of Victoria and David's misconduct was properly documented. The paper trail was devastating, revealing not just their affair, but the systematic way they'd manipulated Sterling Digital's culture to support their relationship. Sunday brought news that confirmed my suspicions about their retreat. Tommy Chen, our neighbor who served on the board of directors for the Hill Country Resort, mentioned seeing David and Victoria sharing an intimate dinner at the resort's restaurant Saturday night. Their table was secluded, their conversation animated, and their behavior clearly that of lovers rather than colleagues. "They seemed very close," Tommy observed with the knowing look of someone who'd witnessed obvious indiscretion. "I hope everything's okay with you and David." The innocent concern in his voice almost made me laugh. Tommy had no idea that his casual observation was providing the final piece of evidence I needed for Monday's board meeting. The weekend retreat that David and Victoria thought was a romantic escape was actually generating documentation of their misconduct that would be used to destroy their careers. Monday morning arrived with unseasonable coolness that felt appropriate for the confrontation ahead. I dressed carefully in a charcoal gray suit that projected authority and professionalism, the armor of a woman prepared for corporate warfare. The reflection staring back at me from the bedroom mirror looked calm and determined, showing no trace of the emotional turmoil that had consumed me just weeks earlier. Patricia met me at Sterling Digital's offices at 8:30, carrying the legal documents that would reshape the company's leadership within the hour. The building's lobby was quiet, with only security guards and cleaning staff present at the early hour. Victoria's executive assistant wouldn't arrive until 9, which gave us time to prepare the conference room and review our strategy one final time. "Remember, you're not Natalie Harper, the betrayed wife in this room," Patricia advised as we rode the elevator to the executive floor. "You're the majority shareholder of NH Holdings exercising legitimate oversight of your investment. Personal motivations are irrelevant to the business case we're presenting." The distinction was crucial, both legally and psychologically. While my actions were motivated by personal betrayal, the justification for Victoria's removal was entirely professional. She'd violated corporate governance standards, created legal liability, and compromised the company's effectiveness. The fact that she'd done it while conducting an affair with my husband was painful irony, not the legal basis for her termination. At precisely 9 o'clock, Victoria entered the conference room expecting a routine board meeting to address whatever mysterious concerns had triggered the emergency session. She was dressed impeccably in a navy blue power suit, her confidence intact despite the weekend's uncertainty. The transformation on her face when she saw me sitting at the head of the conference table was worth every moment of planning and preparation. "Ms. Harper?" she said, her voice betraying the first hint of confusion. "I wasn't expecting you to be here." "Good morning, Victoria," I replied, gesturing for her to take a seat. "Please, sit down. We have quite a bit to discuss." The next few moments were a masterclass in psychological warfare as Victoria processed the implications of my presence. She glanced at Patricia, noting the legal documents spread across the table, then back at me with growing alarm. The successful CEO who'd spent the weekend planning strategy with my husband was beginning to understand that she'd walked into a trap. "I'm afraid I don't understand," Victoria said, remaining standing despite my invitation. "What exactly is the purpose of this meeting?" "I'm here representing NH Holdings, the majority shareholder of Sterling Digital," I explained calmly. "We've become concerned about certain governance issues that require immediate attention." The color drained from Victoria's face as the full scope of the situation became clear. The woman she'd met with last Thursday, the potential investor she'd tried to court, was actually the anonymous owner of her company. More devastating still, she was beginning to realize that I might also be connected to David in ways that would make their affair exponentially more dangerous. "NH Holdings," she repeated slowly, as if testing the words. "You're the majority shareholder." "I am. And you, Ms. Sterling, have been managing my company while conducting yourself in a manner that violates multiple provisions of your employment agreement." Patricia opened the first folder and began reading from the documented evidence of Victoria's misconduct. The inappropriate relationship with a subordinate employee, the preferential treatment that created a hostile work environment for other staff members, the use of company resources for personal activities, the systematic retaliation against employees who might pose competition for David's attention. Each accusation landed like a physical blow, and I watched Victoria's professional composure crumble as she realized the thoroughness of our investigation. The woman who'd projected such confidence and authority during our meeting Thursday was disappearing, replaced by someone who understood that her carefully constructed life was collapsing in real time. "Furthermore," Patricia continued, "your conduct has exposed Sterling Digital to significant legal liability. Sexual harassment claims, wrongful termination suits, and discrimination complaints are all foreseeable consequences of the work environment you've created." "This is about David," Victoria said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're David Harper's wife." The admission hung in the air like a confession. Victoria had finally connected the dots between my identity as majority shareholder and my relationship to the married man she'd been seducing. The expression on her face revealed that she understood the full scope of her miscalculation. "Yes, I am," I confirmed. "Though that fact is irrelevant to your employment status. You're being terminated for cause based on documented violations of corporate policy and professional standards." Patricia slid the termination papers across the table, each page detailing the financial consequences of Victoria's removal. The forfeiture of stock options, the clawback of performance bonuses, the enforcement of non-compete clauses. $4.2 million vanishing with a signature. "You can't do this," Victoria protested, though her voice lacked conviction. "The board will never support this." "The board has already been presented with the evidence," I replied. "As majority shareholder, I have the authority to remove executives for cause. Your conduct clearly meets that standard." The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, as Patricia methodically dismantled every aspect of Victoria's professional life. Security would escort her from the building immediately. Her company equipment would be confiscated. Her access to Sterling Digital's facilities and systems would be terminated within the hour. But the final blow was yet to come. As Victoria signed the termination documents with shaking hands, I delivered the news that would complete her destruction. "Oh, and Victoria," I said as she prepared to leave. "David Harper's employment was also terminated this morning. He's being escorted from the building as we speak." The sound Victoria made was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Her lover and her career had been eliminated simultaneously by the woman they'd both dismissed as irrelevant. The anonymous investor she'd never bothered to identify had destroyed everything she'd worked to build. As security arrived to escort Victoria from Sterling Digital's offices for the final time, I felt the weight of months of betrayal finally lifting from my shoulders. Justice had been served with surgical precision, and the people who'd underestimated me would spend years reckoning with the consequences of their arrogance. The game was over, and I had won more completely than either David or Victoria could have imagined. The aftermath of Victoria's termination spread through Sterling Digital like wildfire. Within hours, news of the CEO's sudden departure was circulating among employees, clients, and competitors throughout Austin's business community. The official statement cited governance concerns and strategic differences with the board, but the speed and finality of the action suggested something far more serious than routine corporate disagreement. I remained at Sterling Digital's offices through the afternoon, working with the interim management team to ensure operational continuity. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now openly managing the company I'd been secretly funding for 3 years. Employees who'd never heard of NH Holdings suddenly found themselves reporting to representatives of their mysterious majority shareholder. David's termination had been handled with equal efficiency. Security had escorted him from the building, while he was still trying to process Victoria's dismissal. According to the reports I received, he'd been stunned into silence, barely managing to collect his personal belongings before being permanently barred from the premises. The golden boy who'd thrived under Victoria's protection was now just another terminated employee with no prospects and diminishing options. The financial markets reacted swiftly to the leadership change. Sterling Digital's stock price fluctuated wildly as investors tried to assess the implications of sudden management upheaval. Industry analysts began speculating about the mysterious circumstances surrounding Victoria's departure, with some suggesting potential scandal or misconduct. The company's reputation, carefully built over years of success, was now tainted by questions about its former leadership. Marcus Rodriguez arrived at Sterling Digital's offices Tuesday morning to help navigate the transition. As my partner in Coastal Capital, he'd been briefed on the situation, but not the personal details that had motivated my actions. His focus was entirely on protecting our investment and maintaining the company's value during the leadership crisis. "The board needs to announce permanent leadership as soon as possible," Marcus advised during our strategy session. "Uncertainty about management direction is killing our market position." "I agree," I replied, reviewing the candidate profiles Human Resources had compiled. "But we need someone with unquestionable integrity and no connections to the previous administration." The emphasis on integrity wasn't lost on Marcus, though he was diplomatic enough not to probe the underlying reasons for Victoria's removal. Corporate governance violations could encompass everything from financial impropriety to ethical lapses, and experienced investors learned not to ask too many questions about internal company politics. By Wednesday, the full scope of Victoria's financial losses had become clear. The clawback provisions in her contract were more extensive than she'd realized, covering not only recent bonuses, but also stock options and deferred compensation, dating back to her appointment as CEO. Her downtown loft, purchased with anticipated earnings that would never materialize, was already listed for sale at a significant loss. David's situation was equally dire. His termination for cause meant no severance package and no benefits continuation. The non-compete clause that had seemed like a minor contract detail was now a career-ending restriction that prevented him from working for any Sterling Digital competitor in Texas for 18 months. Combined with his reputation as someone who'd been terminated for misconduct, his employment prospects in Austin's tight-knit marketing community were virtually non-existent. The personal consequences of their affair were becoming as devastating as the professional ones. Victoria and David's relationship, which had thrived on shared success and mutual ambition, was now anchored in mutual failure and recrimination. The stress of simultaneous career destruction was testing whatever genuine feelings had existed between them. I learned about their deteriorating relationship through Rachel Kim, who'd heard about their very public argument at a downtown bar. Friday evening. Apparently, David had been drinking heavily and loudly blaming Victoria for their predicament, claiming she'd promised him their relationship would be kept confidential. Victoria had responded with equal venom, suggesting that David had been naive to think their affair wouldn't eventually have consequences. They're destroying each other as efficiently as they destroyed their careers, Rachel observed during our lunch meeting. Though I have to say, watching karma work this precisely is somewhat satisfying. Rachel had been privy to my strategy. From the beginning, though she'd maintained professional distance from the corporate aspects of my revenge. As a divorce attorney, she understood that personal vengeance and business decisions needed to remain legally separate, even when they served the same ultimate purpose. "How are you handling all this?" she asked. The satisfaction of winning doesn't always compensate for the pain of what came before. The question forced me to confront emotions I'd been avoiding during the intense focus of recent weeks. The victory was complete and satisfying, but it couldn't erase the fact that my marriage was over and my trust had been permanently damaged. David's betrayal had revealed character flaws that made reconciliation impossible, regardless of the consequences he was now facing. "I'm processing it," I admitted. "The anger is fading, but it's being replaced by something more complicated. Relief, maybe. Or clarity about who I really am when I'm not trying to be someone's supportive wife." The transformation I'd undergone during this ordeal extended far beyond my response to David's infidelity. Taking active control of Sterling Digital had awakened aspects of my personality that had been dormant during years of playing a supporting role in David's career. I'd discovered that I enjoyed corporate leadership and strategic decision-making, in ways that managing my investment portfolio from behind the scenes had never satisfied. By the following Monday, Sterling Digital had stabilized under interim management, and the board had approved my recommendation for permanent CEO. Susan Martinez, a veteran executive with an impeccable reputation and no connections to the previous administration, would take over immediately. Her first priority would be rebuilding the company's culture and eliminating the toxic dynamics that Victoria's leadership had created. The employee satisfaction surveys we conducted revealed the extent of the problems Victoria's affair with David had caused. Multiple staff members reported feeling demoralized by the obvious favoritism and concerned about the ethics of senior leadership. Several talented employees had been actively seeking other opportunities, and 2 had already submitted resignations before Victoria's termination was announced. Susan's appointment was universally welcomed by Sterling Digital's staff. Her reputation for fairness and professionalism offered hope that the company could move beyond the damage caused by Victoria's misconduct. More importantly, her external perspective would help identify and correct systemic issues that might have contributed to the governance failures. The broader Austin business community took longer to process the implications of Victoria's dramatic fall from grace. She had been seen as a rising star, someone whose success represented the new generation of corporate leadership. Her termination for ethical violations sent shockwaves through professional networks, where she'd been considered a role model. David's professional reputation suffered even more severely. While Victoria could potentially rebuild her career in another market, David's termination as the subordinate party in an inappropriate relationship carried additional stigma. The perception was that he'd advanced through personal relationships, rather than merit, a career poison that would follow him regardless of geography. 3 weeks after the terminations, I received an unexpected phone call from David. His voice sounded hollow, stripped of the confidence and enthusiasm that had characterized our conversations during happier times. "Natalie, we need to talk," he said without preamble. "I know what you did, and I understand why you did it, but we need to discuss our future, whatever that might look like." I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop in South Austin, neutral territory where we could have a conversation without the weight of our shared history overwhelming the discussion. When I arrived, David was already seated at a corner table, looking older and more worn than I'd ever seen him. The man who'd thrived on success and recognition was learning to navigate failure and rejection. "You destroyed both our careers," he said without accusation, just stating a fact. "Victoria figured out that you were NH Holdings about a week ago. She's been trying to find legal grounds to challenge the termination, but your lawyer was thorough." "Patricia is very good at what she does," I replied, sitting across from him. Though the terminations were based on documented misconduct, not personal revenge. The results are the same either way. David stared into his coffee cup. "I lost everything. My job, my reputation, any chance of working in Austin's marketing industry. Victoria's already talking about moving to Denver or Seattle to start over." The mention of Victoria's relocation plans didn't surprise me. A geographic fresh start was probably her only option for rebuilding her career, though the circumstances of her departure from Sterling Digital would follow her regardless of location. Corporate governance violations were matters of public record, and executive recruiters conducted thorough background checks. "What did you want to discuss about our future?" I asked. "I want to apologize," David said, finally meeting my eyes. "Not because I think it will change anything, but because you deserve to hear it. I was selfish and cruel, and I destroyed something good because I was flattered by attention from someone I thought was more important than you." The apology was more honest than I'd expected, though it came far too late to repair the damage he'd caused. David was learning humility through consequences rather than conscience, which made his remorse feel more like regret about getting caught than genuine recognition of his failures. "I appreciate the apology," I said carefully, "but it doesn't change the fundamental issue. You chose to betray our marriage, and I chose to protect my business interests. Both decisions have consequences we have to live with." "I know," David D. nodded. "I'm not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I lost, and it wasn't just my career." We talked for another 30 minutes about practical matters related to our divorce proceedings. Rachel had prepared comprehensive documentation that protected my business interests while providing David with basic financial support during his transition period. I wasn't vindictive enough to leave him destitute, but I wasn't generous enough to subsidize his fresh start either. As we prepared to leave, David asked one final question that revealed how completely he'd misunderstood our relationship dynamics. "Did you always have this much power?" he asked. "The ability to destroy careers and reshape companies? Was I married to someone I never really knew?" The question forced me to consider how much of myself I'd hidden during our marriage, not through deliberate deception, but through his lack of interest in understanding my professional capabilities. David had been content to see me as his supportive, Wife with a nice career, never bothering to investigate the full scope of my business activities. I've always been exactly who I am, I replied. You just never bothered to pay attention. 6 months later, Sterling Digital's performance had returned to pre-crisis levels under Susan Martinez's leadership. The company's reputation had recovered, and employee satisfaction scores were higher than they'd been in years. The toxic culture that Victoria's affair had created was replaced by professional standards that prioritized merit over personal relationships. Victoria had indeed relocated to Denver, where she was reportedly working as a consultant while trying to rebuild her career. The $4 million in forfeited compensation had forced her to downsize her lifestyle dramatically, though she was young enough to potentially recover financially given time and better judgment. David had found work with a small marketing firm in Houston, a significant step down from his previous position, but enough to support himself while serving out his non-compete period. He was living in a modest apartment and driving a used car, learning to navigate middle-class financial reality after years of executive-level lifestyle. As for me, I'd discovered unexpected satisfaction in taking a more active role in Coastal Capital's portfolio management. The experience of directly managing Sterling Digital during the transition had revealed capabilities I'd never fully explored. Marcus and I were considering expanding our hands-on approach to other investments, using our combined expertise to drive performance improvements rather than simply providing capital. The anonymity that had once protected my privacy was no longer necessary or desirable. I'd learned that stepping out of the shadows and taking direct action could be far more effective than operating behind the scenes. The mysterious investor persona had served its purpose, but the woman who'd emerged from David's betrayal was someone altogether more formidable. Looking back on the entire ordeal, I realized that David and Victoria had actually done me a favor, though certainly not intentionally. Their affair had forced me to confront the limitations I'd accepted in both my marriage and my career. The process of destroying their carefully constructed deception had revealed strengths and capabilities I'd never fully utilized. The anonymous investor who'd once been content to remain hidden had become a woman willing to step into the light and claim the power she'd always possessed. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just getting even, but discovering who you really are when you stop letting other people define your worth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.